Dead America. The Portland Gambit. Part 1 of 2. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 60. Willamette River, south of Portland, Oregon. 3 men drifted leisurely down the serene river aboard a mid-sized yacht, its hull cutting through the gentle ripples. At the helm, Private Simmons, a 19-year-old fresh out of basic training when chaos descended upon the world, guided the vessel with a steady hand. On the deck, Corporal Parker, a weathered man in his mid-20s marked by scars from an explosion suffered on deployment, pored over a map strewn with red X marks and scattered notes detailing potential salvage points. Seated nearby, Dave, a stout middle-aged man, meticulously inspected a large drone station beside him. "How close are we to the next town?" Dave asked. Parker lifted the map, scanning its markings before responding, "About another mile or so up. It's a small place called Canby." "Hey, Corporal, did you say Canby?" Simmons interjected, briefly leaving the controls to retrieve a spiral-bound notebook from the cabin. Flipping through its pages, he revealed a trove of meticulously pinned notes about various locations along their route. Among the entries, a prominently circled Canby caught Parker's eye as Simmons confirmed, "Yep, this was the one I was thinking of." Tossing the notebook over to Parker, Simmons's revelation prompted an audible sigh from the seasoned corporal. "Well, this can't be good," Parker muttered. Parker scrutinized the notebook page, his eyes tracing down to a note scribbled below the circled town. Clearing his throat, he read aloud, "Okay, so according to the note, Canby was designated as a safe zone during the early hours of the apocalypse. People who managed to flee Portland made their way here. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that it did not go well," Dave remarked dryly. "You would be correct on that, Dave," Parker said. "Apparently the concentration of zombies in abandoned cars is so significant that even reconnaissance satellites picked it up." "When was the last batch of photos taken?" Simmons queried, his brow furrowing with concern. "It doesn't say, but the word around the water cooler is that they only have access to a handful of them still. So if I had to guess, I'd say during the first couple weeks of shit going down," Parker said. "So, are we even going to bother checking the town out?" Simmons asked, his tone skeptical. "If it's as overrun as we think it is, what's the point? We don't have the ammunition to clear it out." "I'm leaving that decision up to Dave here," Parker stated firmly. "Why me?" Dave questioned, clearly taken aback. "Because you know your equipment and how much battery power we have left," Parker explained patiently. Dave pondered for a moment before rising and making his way to the stern of the yacht. Several battery chargers connected to solar generators awaited him there. He inspected the status of the charges, nodding with satisfaction. "Looks like we're good to go for Canby," Dave announced upon returning. "These charges are solid. We should have plenty of power for the day." "Okay, you heard the man," Simmons, Parker directed. "Get us close to Canby." "You got it, Corporal," Simmons replied. Parker settled back onto the deck, his legs dangling over the side as he savored the cool morning air and the picturesque surroundings. Nearby, Dave busied himself with inserting a fresh battery into his drone, meticulously running through his pre-flight checklist. 15 minutes drifted by in unhurried tranquility until the town of Canby loomed into view on the horizon. A collective reaction followed as the pungent odor from the town reached them, despite their distance of a quarter-mile offshore. "Good Lord, I haven't smelled anything that foul since we walked into Seattle. How big of a town was this?" Parker said. Simmons peered out from the controls, surveying the outskirts of Canby. "Couldn't be that big. 15, maybe 20,000 people, although that was before it became a refugee camp." "Well, we're about to find out how many of those things are in town," Dave remarked, adjusting his focus back to the present. "Just as soon as you bring this thing to a stop." "Sorry, Dave, I'm on it," Simmons responded swiftly. He shut off the boat's engine and operated the anchor, the metallic clank resonating through the air as the yacht settled into place. "You're good to go," Simmons confirmed, his attention shifting to the drone as Dave activated its propellers with a series of switches and controls. While Dave concentrated on the drone's feed displayed on a small screen, both Simmons and Parker fixated on a larger television monitor, observing the live footage transmitted by the drone's camera. Do we have any specific targets in town? Dave asked. Parker picked up the notebook, glancing over the sparse list of potential locations with a shake of his head. There are a couple of grocery stores and supercenters, but if that stench is any indication, it's not going to be worth it, Parker muttered. Okay, I'll just do a flyby, see if there's anything worthwhile, Dave responded. We'll keep our eyes peeled. Dave nodded and went back to focusing on the screen. The drone flew low, 100 feet in the air, towards the town. There was a large residential area nestled in a collection of trees, with the downtown area a mile ahead. Even as the drone flew over the homes below, the men could see hundreds of zombies on the streets. Several of the fields were also filled with cars, like they were running out of room to park when they fled to the town. After a minute of flying, they hit an open area just before the downtown area. All three men gasped at the sight, which was thousands of zombies packed into the town tightly. There was barely a spot of the ground that could be seen. Yeah, this is a lost cause. It doesn't matter what's here, there's no way we'd ever be able to get to it, Simmons remarked despondently. As much as I hate to admit it, Simmons is right. Go ahead and bring it back, Dave, Parker conceded, his voice heavy with disappointment. I'm already at the downtown area. I'll run it down Main Street and spin it around, Dave replied. Okay, just be quick about it. We have lots of other places to check out today, Parker urged, turning away from the monitor in frustration. He moved to the bow of the boat, staring out across the water with a troubled expression. Meanwhile, Dave maneuvered the drone down Main Street, his heart sinking as he observed the entire road teeming with zombies. This entire exercise is a waste of time. Anything of value would have been snatched up by the militia, Dave muttered to himself. 4 days into this trip and we've found nothing, not a damn thing that's worth the effort. Pausing for a moment of reflection, Dave's mood shifted slightly. On the other hand, it is nice to get out of Seattle for a bit. Been a while since I got some quiet time in nature. Dave glanced up from the drone's controls, momentarily soaking in the scenery as the aircraft continued its slow journey down Main Street. Before he could refocus, Private Simmons's urgent shout pierced the air. Hang on. Hang on. Go back, Simmons exclaimed. Parker, irritated at being pulled away from his brief moment of respite in nature, turned sharply and strode back toward the monitor. This better be good, Simmons. If this is a grocery store, I'm tossing your ass overboard, Parker grumbled. Simmons forcefully issued his command, surprising both Parker and Dave. Just fly it back and look to the left. Okay, I'm on it. What the hell am I looking for? Dave responded, his attention fully engaged. The building with giant American flags on it, Simmons directed. Following Simmons's instructions, Dave steered the drone in reverse, retracing its path down the street before glancing to the left. There, occupying half a city block, stood a large building adorned with fluttering American flags atop and a prominent grand opening banner draped across its facade. Is that what I think it is? Parker asked, a glimmer of hope creeping into his voice. Dave maneuvered the drone to hover just 30 feet above the street, its camera zooming in on the building below. Clear as day, a sizable sign emblazoned with Buddy's guns confirmed their discovery. Why in the hell was this not on the manifest? Simmons said. It looks like it had just opened. Probably wasn't listed when whoever made the list did their research, Dave speculated as he scanned the building. Now for the million-dollar question. Is there anything inside? Parker said. Dave took a deep breath, guiding the drone lower and closer towards the front windows of Buddy's guns. As it descended, the horde of zombies below reached up futilely, their grasping hands just shy of the airborne device. Approaching the window, Dave scrutinized the bars and intact yet damaged glass. All three men focused intently on their screens, scanning the interior for any signs of movement. A collective sigh of relief escaped them as they observed the quiet store, its shelves still neatly stocked. It doesn't look like there's a single box of ammunition missing, Parker noted with a hint of astonishment. It could be that this place didn't have a chance to open, Dave speculated. Even if it didn't open, why didn't someone break in when all hell broke loose in town? Simmons asked. Maybe they did, Dave suggested. Ascending the drone, Dave maneuvered it behind the building, focusing the camera on the back door and zooming in. Visible damage around the lock and dried blood splattered across the door and nearby wall indicated previous attempts at forced entry. "Well, at least we know the building is secure," Simmons remarked. "Hopefully not too secure, because someone's going to have to get in there," Parker said. "Do you really think they're going to send a team down here? I mean, look at the road. How in the world is anybody going to get through that?" Simmons questioned, gesturing towards the teeming masses below. "And that's assuming they find someone crazy enough to even try." "That's not our call to make, Private. Our job is to find stuff like this and report it in," Parker reminded him firmly. "Okay, I'll get command on the line," Simmons said. Simmons stepped away from the monitor, deftly adjusting the radio switches until he connected with the appropriate personnel. Meanwhile, Parker approached Dave, who continued to pilot the drone around Buddy's guns. "How much ammo do you think is in there?" Parker inquired. "Hell if I know, Parker. I just know it's a big-ass store that looks completely untouched," Dave replied, his attention divided between the drone's controls and the conversation. "There was a grand opening in an area populated by hunters and ex-military, which means there's bound to be doorbuster sales, right?" Parker reasoned. "If I were starting a business, that's how I would run it," Dave said. "There could be, 100,000 rounds in there?" Parker speculated. "Or there could be 10,000, Dave countered. "True, but we've been out here for the better part of a week now, and this is the only worthwhile target we found," Parker pointed out. "Based on the rumors I've heard around Seattle about how little ammunition is floating around, I'm pretty sure they'd send someone out here if we told them there was 100 rounds. Dave nodded in agreement with Parker's assessment just as Simmons interjected, "Hey, Corporal, I got command on the line." Parker took the communicator from Simmons, his tone authoritative as he addressed command. "Hey, Command, this is Corporal Parker. We found something that you're going to want to come get." Chapter 2. 25 miles east of White Salmon lay the Dalles, a town of 16,000 right on the coast of the Columbia River. Over the last 6 weeks, the survivors in White Salmon had slowly been working to clear the town out. For weeks, they had been forced to deal with stragglers who wandered out and shambled towards their refuge in White Salmon. With the help of Corporal Jinx and his squad of soldiers, they were determined to put an end to the threat once and for all. On the eastern side of town, Jinx, Private Birch, Private Rollins, and Zion walked towards a small, 2-story office building that sat off the road. In the parking lot were half a dozen cars, left to rot by their long-deceased owners. The 4 men stood outside, looking towards the building and seeing several blood-stained handprints on the front window. They gripped their makeshift weapons tightly, with Jinx and Rollins holding blood-stained metal spikes, while Zion and Birch gripped metal baseball bats. "What do you say, boys? You ready to finally clear this bad boy out?" Jinx asked. "Yeah, we've been putting it off for too long," Birch replied. "Hey now, there's nothing wrong with picking the low-hanging fruit first," Rollins said, motioning back towards a neighborhood filled with single-story homes. "Yeah, but it really shouldn't have taken us a week to clear that neighborhood," Birch responded. "It's not my fault I like to be meticulous," Rollins said. "You and I must have very different definitions of the word meticulous, because I remember you ransacking every pantry you came across and pocketing more than your share of snack cakes," Birch retorted. Jinx looked back at Rollins with fake outrage. "Rollins, are you holding out on us?" "Of course not, Corporal. I would never do that to you," Rollins said. "Then what about that box of strawberry cakes you found yesterday?" Birch interjected. Jinx took a step out from the line, staring at Rollins with more fake outrage. "You're holding out on strawberry cakes, Rollins?" "I didn't think you liked strawberry, Corporal," Rollins defended. "Well, I do. It's my favorite, in fact. I'm sorry, soldier, but holding out on strawberry cakes is a court-martial level offense," Jinx declared. "I might still have a few tucked away back home," Rollins admitted. "That's the right answer," Jinx said. The entire time the banter between the soldiers was going on, Zion was staring ahead at the building, getting intently focused. "If you 3 are done talking about dessert, can we go kick some ass?" Zion asked. Jinx looked over to the two privates, everybody nodding in agreement. My apologies, Zion. I just wanted to make sure I keep my men whipped into shape. And now that you've done that, it's time to get to work, Zion said. You got it, Jinx agreed. As Jinx stepped forward, Zion reached his giant arm out, grabbing the corporal by the chest and stopping him in his tracks. And I mean this with all sincerity, Jinx, Zion said. What's that, Zion? Jinx asked. I better get one of those strawberry cakes, Zion demanded. Zion cracked a smirk, prompting Jinx to let out a chuckle, nodding to his friend. I'll make sure you get two. Zion nodded as the men walked up to the door of the office building, stopping just in front of it. So how do we want to play this? Are we doing a rush attack? Some catcalling? The pyro? Jinx asked. No more pyro. Took me 3 washes to get the smell of smoke out of my clothes last time, Zion replied. Yeah, but that fire felt damn good as the snow was falling, didn't it? Jinx said. Okay, fine, pyro is fine, but only on snow days, Zion conceded. Jinx smirked and nodded in agreement. This is our first place of the day. Let's get warmed up with a little catcalling, Birch suggested. Okay, catcall it is. Rollins, would you be so kind as to get the door for us? Jinx asked. I'm on it, Rollins said. Rollins walked up to the door, giving it a push only to find that it was locked up tight. He pressed his face to the glass, peering inside and seeing that there was nothing in the immediate area. Rollins flipped his long metal spike around, using the blunt back end to smash out the top portion of the glass. As it hit the ground inside, he looked in to make sure nothing was coming his way. Although he could hear moans and the shuffling of feet, he didn't see anything. He quickly reached inside, unlatching the door and pushing it open. He drew out a knife, kneeling down and wedging it into the bottom of the door so that it acted like a doorstop. You guys ready? Rollins asked. The floor is yours, Jinx replied. Rollins let out a loud whistle before yelling out into the building. Yeah, where are my bitches at? Rollins then walked back to the others, with the trio giving him a strange look. Where are my bitches at? Jinx repeated. I'm guessing it's been a minute since you did some catcalling, Zion remarked. I did 2 tours in the sandbox damn near back to back, and we're 2 months into this bullshit. So yeah, it's been a minute, Rollins explained. Yeah, well, when you bring me my snack cake later, I'll give you a few pointers. Because I personally know of at least a dozen women back in town that would shank your ass if they heard you say that, Zion said. Rollins thought about it for a moment before letting out a chuckle and nodding. Their moment was broken up as the first creature shambled out of the door. It was a man in a bloody, tattered business suit, letting out a satisfied moan as it took notice of the 4 men standing in the parking lot just a few yards away. Let's put it down, Birch, Jinx commanded. Birch nodded as he followed behind Jinx, who stepped over to the side of the door. Jinx smacked his metal spike down on the ground, the metallic sound resonating in the air and drawing the attention of the creature. The ghoul moaned and shuffled in their direction. As it got within striking distance, Jinx stabbed it in the chest with his metal spike, holding it in place so that Birch could step around to the side of it. He swung his bat with every bit of force he could muster, cracking the creature's skull with a single blow. As Jinx tossed it to the ground, they heard more moaning by the front door, with 2 more business people shambling out. Their dress clothes were tattered and bloody, and their excitement was noticeable as they moved towards Zion. Rollins stepped up, thrusting his metal spike as hard as he could towards the ghouls who were lined up. He hit the first one with so much force that it went straight through its chest and into the second one, holding them in place. Zion stepped up, making quick work of the 2 creatures with his baseball bat. The forceful swings caved in the heads of both creatures before they were unceremoniously tossed to the side. The 4 of them got ready for more fighting, staring at the door, but nothing ever came. After a couple of minutes, they started to relax. Really, that was it? 3 of those things? Rollins questioned. There's half a dozen cars in the lot. It doesn't make any sense, Birch observed. Let's go inside and make some sense of it then, Zion suggested. Jinx nodded and took point, stepping through the threshold of the door with everybody else behind him. The foursome stopped in the main lobby, listening intently for trouble but hearing nothing. As they walked through the building, they could see signs of conflict everywhere. Overturned cubicle walls, blood splatter, and a couple of dead bodies strewn about. While their guard was up, they continued working their way through the building before stopping just outside of a large glass-walled conference room. "Well, that explains a lot," Rollins said. Inside were a dozen bodies, their heads badly damaged, scattered about in the conference room. A couple of them were seated at the table, the weapons that felled them still stuck in their heads. "Looks like someone really didn't like their morning meeting," Jinx remarked. "Hey, if it can be sent in an email, it probably should," Birch added. "Come on, Rollins, let's clear the second floor," Zion instructed. "We'll wrap up down here," Jinx said. After several minutes, they cleared the building, finding little more than some more carnage on the second floor. As they exited the building, Jinx got a call on the radio. "Hey, Jinx here," he answered. "Hey, where are you guys at?" Calvin's voice crackled through. "That office building on the east side." "What's going on?" Jinx asked. "Stay put. I'm heading your way," Calvin responded. "Calvin, just tell me what's going on," Jinx pressed. "Jinx, just do what I tell you." "Trust me," Calvin insisted. "I tell you what, why don't you meet me at the diner that's a few blocks away on the main strip?" Jinx suggested. "I'll be there in 5, Calvin agreed. Jinx turned to the others, shrugging his shoulders. "Looks like I'm taking my coffee break early today." "Let's all go," Zion said. Jinx gave Zion a confused look, as Zion was always about getting the job done when they were out in the field. "You want to take a break already?" Zion shrugged, letting out a smirk. "What can I say? All that talk about snack cakes got me hungry." Everybody broke out into laughter as they started walking back towards the meeting spot. After a couple of blocks, they approached a small business district which held some small shops. As they walked, they spotted Missy and Harold, who were hard at work inside an abandoned store. The two former engineering students were struggling to lift up a heavy container, prompting Zion to run over to help. "I got you, Missy," Zion said, getting underneath it and holding it high above the door as Harold climbed up a ladder to attach a harness to it. As they got it situated, the others came over. "What are you guys up to?" Jinx asked. "Well, you know how we've been having problems with the militia lately?" Missy began. "I know how we've had run-ins with them south of town and nowhere near here," Jinx replied, confused. "Well, I figured that one day we might have trouble here, so I wanted to prepare for it," Missy explained. "By trying to make Harold here do some heavy lifting?" Jinx asked. Missy chuckled before responding. "To be fair, look at his arms. The boy does need to work out." "Hey now," Harold protested. "Am I wrong?" Missy challenged. Harold thought about responding but ultimately dropped his head in defeat. "That's what I thought," Missy said. "So what is this?" Birch asked. "Just a little spring-loaded trap I whipped up. The first person through the door will get through just fine, but if they flick the switch on the wall over there, then the next person through will get a nasty surprise," Missy explained, pointing to the heavy object hanging above the door. "So what's in it?" Rollins asked. "I could bore you with the details," Missy began. "Please don't," Rollins interjected. Missy let out a laugh as she continued. "Let's just say that the chemical burn it will deliver won't kill them, but it will sure make them wish that it did." "Remind me to stay on your good side," Rollins remarked. Missy gave him a wink as a horn honked behind them. The men turned around to spot Calvin waving at them from a pickup truck. "Will you guys get over here?" Calvin called out. The four men waved goodbye to Missy and Harold as they walked to the truck, where Calvin was still sitting in the driver's seat. "What's got you all riled up?" "Did you find out that Rollins here was holding out snack cakes on us?" Zion asked. Calvin pointed directly at Rollins. "You're an asshole." "But no, that's not why. Y'all need to get in." "Where are we going?" Jinx asked. "Back to White Salmon. Your Sergeant Dickerson says he has a mission for you," Calvin explained. And you couldn't tell me that over the radio? Jinx questioned. I had very specific instructions. Nothing over an unsecured channel, Calvin replied. Jinx looked over to Zion, giving him a nod before jumping into the front seat. Zion could see the seriousness on his face before jumping in the back with the others. Let's get a move on then, Zion said. Calvin nodded as he threw the truck into gear, hitting the gas. As they drove, Jinx's mind began to race. I don't know what this is, but if they're going full secrecy and calling me in, it's got to be big. Chapter 3. Calvin raced down the interstate as if he knew there was a ticking clock. Jinx didn't question it. Instead, he took the time to admire the scenery. The interstate ran right along the river, and in the morning hour, it was beautiful to look at. After a good 20 minutes of driving, they reached the outskirts of White Salmon. Calvin slowed down as he approached the exit, pulling off and stopping at the barricade, where 3 armed people stood. One of the armed guards was Private Jarvis, the young blonde-headed woman who immediately spotted Jinx, letting out a sigh. Well, if you're back in town, it means something's going down. Do you want me to tag along? Jarvis asked. No, Jarvis, keep your post here. I know it's been a few days since we had any militia contact, but it's only a matter of time, Jinx replied. If they come this way, they're going to regret it, Jarvis said, pointing back to 2 older men in flannel shirts, sporting hunting rifles. My friends here already bagged us a deer this morning. I hope you mean by chasing it down and strangling it with their bare hands and not by shooting, Jinx retorted. The 2 men started to get nervous, and Jarvis immediately regretted saying what she did. Jinx could read the guilt on their faces and immediately laid into them. How many bullets do each of you have? Jinx demanded. Everybody held up their remaining rounds, which fit into the palms of their hands. Jinx quickly counted them up. Cool, so you 2 good old boys have 9 shots between you. How many did you waste on the deer? Jinx asked. Just 1, sir, one of the men replied. Jinx thought about it for a moment before nodding. I tell you what, if a couple of pounds of that ends up on my doorstep, I won't ream you out anymore. We have a deal? Both of the men smiled and nodded enthusiastically. Good, but no more hunting with guns. I don't care how big the deer is. If we get into a fight with the militia, every shot is going to count, Jinx warned. I'll get them in line, Jinx, Jarvis promised. You better, Jarvis, Jinx said. Jinx smacked Calvin on the arm, prompting him to hit the gas. As they drove towards the heart of town, they saw numerous levels of defensive positions that had been set up. Some of the vacant houses had been turned into gunner nests. While they looked intimidating, Jinx knew the truth, which rendered them little more than impressive-looking props. For what it's worth, Jinx, you did the right thing by laying into those 2 back there, Calvin said. I'm glad you think so, Calvin, Jinx replied. I know I'm not privy to how much we have in reserve, but given that we didn't really start out with all that much, I can't imagine there's much left, Calvin admitted. Jinx thought about it for a moment, knowing that Sergeant Dickerson ordered the full ammunition count to be kept secret. Calvin, you don't know what I'm about to tell you, even after I tell it to you. I'd forget my name half the time if it wasn't written on the inside of my underwear, Calvin joked. Jinx cracked a smile as he continued. There's maybe 500 rounds of ammunition left in town. Calvin was visibly shaken by the revelation, prompting Jinx to continue. So you can see why we've been keeping that from everyone. If they knew, it would cause a panic. Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's a hostile army to our south or anything, Calvin remarked. From what I understand, there's not that much flowing in Seattle. Especially after the transport from Idaho was hijacked, Jinx explained. Again, Calvin winced visibly. Damn man, I thought that was going to be our saving grace. They haven't said anything about that to us. I had to force it out of them. The only reason I was told was due to knowing Sergeant Dickerson for years, so I could tell when he was hiding something, Jinx said. Do you think that's why they're calling you back? Calvin asked. Well, it's either that or they want something big blown up, Jinx replied. You do enjoy that, don't you? Calvin said. Jinx smirked and shrugged his shoulders. Like my daddy always said, if you're doing something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Calvin chuckled as he pulled into City Hall. As they exited the vehicle and walked up to the doors, the guards opened them up but stopped everybody but Jinx from walking in. I'm sorry, I have orders to keep everyone but the corporal out, the guard said. Zion stepped up, getting a few inches away from the guard's face. Are you really telling me that I can't go into a building in my town? The guard swallowed hard, knowing that Zion could break him in half and not break a sweat. His voice cracked as he attempted to stand his ground. I'm sorry, Mr. Zion, but I have my orders. Zion gave him a cockeyed look, which put more fear into the guard, forcing Jinx to intervene. He's coming in with me, Jinx insisted. I'm sorry, Corporal, but... The guard started. I said he's coming in with me. If there's any blowback, it'll come to me, Jinx stated. The guard got a slight nod from Jinx, who was coaxing him to go along with it. Finally, the guard relented, opening the door and looking away from Zion. They're waiting for you in the conference room, the guard said. The two men walked down the hallway of the building. As they entered the conference room, there was a laptop on the desk, along with Sergeant Dickerson and Captain Odom standing behind it. If I had a more demeaning job to demote that guard to, I would, Sergeant Dickerson muttered. It's not his fault, Dickerson. I was just insistent on Zion coming along. Makes me feel important, like I have a bodyguard, Jinx said. Zion glanced down to Jinx, who cracked a smile before patting his friend on the chest playfully. So what do we have, Dickerson? I have to assume it's big if Captain Odom made the trip down, Jinx remarked. It's good to see you too, Jinx, Captain Odom said. So what's the situation? Jinx asked. That depends. Do you want the good news or the bad news first? Captain Odom inquired. Oh wow, there's actually good news for a change. By all means, let's have that, Jinx replied. Something new. I like it, Zion added. We have scouts going to the small towns in the region. It's pretty much the same story at everyone. It's either been cleaned out or what's there isn't worth the manpower to get it, Captain Odom explained. But you found something this time? Jinx asked. We did. There's a small town to the south of Portland called Canby. From the looks of it, they had a new gun store that was set to open around the same time the world went to hell. It's sealed up tight, and the shelves appear to be well stocked, Captain Odom said. So why are you telling me? Don't you have teams dedicated to this sort of thing? Jinx asked. We do, however. They're not exactly trained to handle the bad news, Sergeant Dickerson admitted. Dickerson turned around the laptop, which showed a satellite image of the town. Jinx and Zion leaned in close, seeing that the roads were completely blacked out. Oh, please tell me that's not what I think it is, Jinx said. The town is off the interstate by several miles, so someone in Portland thought it would be a good idea to tell people to head there if they could get out, Captain Odom explained. Jinx let out a sigh as he sat back in his chair. Just tell me how many. Our drone pilot flew around the town a few times. They're estimating between 25 and 30,000 of those things, Sergeant Dickerson said. Jinx let out a laugh, shaking his head. Gentlemen, I have to say, I'm flattered beyond belief that you think I'm good enough to pull this off. But even I have my limits. Why don't you just fly a helicopter in there and get it? Land on the roof, do a little shopping, and everybody's home by dinner, Zion suggested. My bodyguard brings up a good point, Jinx said. Zion lightly smacked Jinx on the arm, prompting some smirks from both of them. We thought about doing that, but the fuel situation still isn't great in Seattle, at least for aircraft. We're struggling to get the refinery fully back online, and even then, we're only going to be able to make a limited amount due to the lack of additives we need, Captain Odom explained. Then just how in the hell are you planning on getting it out? Jinx asked. Well, Jinx, while we don't have gas for helicopters, we do have solar chargers for batteries, and there were a lot of hobby shops in the Seattle area, Sergeant Dickerson said. Jinx and Zion gave them confused looks. Drones, gentlemen. We're going to use drones, Sergeant Dickerson clarified. So you're going to fly them out one bullet at a time? Zion asked. We have a small fleet of heavy-duty drones. So your mission would be to get to the store, pack them up in bags weighing 50 pounds, and leave them on the roof, Captain Odom explained. It seems like a huge risk for a few bags of ammunition, Jinx remarked. Yeah, how many rounds are we talking? Zion asked. To be honest, we don't know. But based on what our pilot has been able to see through the windows, we're estimating it could be upwards of 100,000 rounds, Sergeant Dickerson replied. Zion and Jinx exchanged a glance, with Zion waving Jinx in closer. He whispered into his ear, prompting a nod from Jinx. Okay, we'll take on your suicide mission. On one condition, Jinx said. You do realize I can just order you to go, right? Captain Odom said. You could. And I could take a field trip down to Bend and let them know what I know. I'm sure they'd be open to letting me hang out there, Jinx countered. And if you make him do that, then every one of you is out of my town, Zion added. The captain and sergeant exchanged a look, contemplating for a moment before nodding in agreement. Okay, Jinx, state your terms, Captain Odom said. This is a suicide mission if there ever was one. So whatever ammunition we manage to pull out of there, 20% gets allocated to the town here, Jinx demanded. You're out of your mind, Jinx. 20%? You know this isn't the only front in this war, don't you? Captain Odom retorted. Oh, it's a war now? Okay, well surely you know that we're on the front lines of it. The militia isn't taking potshots at you up in Seattle. They are firing at our people here. And if they knew we were down to our last 500 rounds, they'd overrun us in a heartbeat. So unless you want to lose the forward base here, you'll do what I ask, Jinx argued. Odom began to get angry, but Dickerson put his hand on the captain's arm, getting him to calm down. Jinx is right. 20% of the ammunition needs to come here, Sergeant Dickerson said. Or you can pull someone from Seattle if you want. I'm sure there are some special forces boys who would love a crack at it, Jinx suggested. Captain Odom thought about it for a moment before relenting. Truth be told, Corporal, I'm not sure who I can trust up there in Seattle. Jinx and Dickerson got a concerned look on their faces as he said that. You want to run that by me again? Jinx asked. You heard me. I can't prove it, at least not yet, but I'm pretty confident that we have a leak up there, Captain Odom admitted. That's not surprising. There's a lot of ex-military in the militia. They're bound to have friends who are still enlisted, Jinx said. I've tried my best to contain who knows about this operation, but time is of the essence, and I know I can trust you. So if you go, you'll get your 20%, Captain Odom agreed. Jinx looked over to Zion, who just smiled and shrugged. You know me, I'm always up for busting some zombie heads. We'll start making our preparations now. Chapter 4. Jinx and Zion walked down the hallway at City Hall towards the front door, both moving with purpose, acutely aware of the ticking clock. Call it out. What do you need from me? Zion asked. Transportation for starters, Jinx replied. How many do you want? Zion inquired. One fully loaded SUV will do the trick. Just make sure it can do off-road without any issue, Jinx clarified. Zion stopped abruptly, prompting Jinx to halt and turn back. What do you mean you just want one vehicle? There's 30,000 of those things out there, Zion said. Which is why we're going in light, Jinx explained calmly. We don't have the manpower or firepower to take them on head-on, so we're going to be engaging in some world-class diversion techniques, Jinx said before pausing for a moment, realizing just how challenging of a job this was actually going to be. Make that a Galaxy-class diversion. Mainly because we're probably going to need an explosion visible from space to pull this off, Jinx added, his tone laced with dark humor. You're not exactly instilling me with a sense of confidence, Zion said. Don't worry, you're in good hands, Jinx reassured him with a grin. I have no doubt, and transport won't be a problem. What else do you need? Zion asked. As they continued walking, Jinx fell into thought. Honest question, man to man, no judgment whatsoever, Jinx began. What is it? Zion prompted. Do you think your man Calvin is up to the task? Jinx asked seriously. What do you mean? Zion asked. I mean, do you think he can handle a run like this? I know you two have run headlong into shit before, but this is going to be on another level. Jinx clarified. Yeah, he can handle it. But I gotta know, why him? Zion questioned. Because he's the best shot we have. Now, I'm hoping we can get in and out before the militia shows up, but if we don't. Jinx trailed off. Then you're going to want someone who can take down enemies from a distance, Zion finished for him. Pretty much, yeah, Jinx agreed. And he'll do it too. So who else are we bringing? Zion asked. Private Birch. Jinx answered promptly. Birch? Isn't he a bit small for a mission like this? Why not Rollins? That boy is built like a tank, Zion asked. You're the only tank I need on this mission. Rollins is a blunt instrument, which has its value, just not on this outing. Birch is resourceful, and I get the sense we're going to need that, Jinx explained. Okay, I trust you, Zion nodded, understanding Jinx's rationale. Good. Get the vehicle and some provisions. Take Calvin with you and let him know what you volunteered him for. Meet back here in 20 and we'll go over the plan, Jinx instructed. What are you going to do? Zion asked. Hit the library, Jinx replied with a smirk. Zion looked perplexed, but Jinx gave him a thumbs up as they walked away. 20 minutes later, Zion, Calvin, and Birch converged on City Hall, their demeanor determined as they entered the conference room. There they found Captain Odom and Sergeant Dickerson focused on the computer screen. Where's Jinx? Captain Odom asked. And where's the rest of the team? Added Sergeant Dickerson. We're it, Zion replied succinctly. Odom and Dickerson exchanged a concerned glance before shaking their heads. Jinx must have his reasons, Dickerson said. As if on cue, Jinx entered the room, carrying a book with several note cards protruding from it and a small canvas bag, which he casually tossed onto the table. Do I even want to know what's in the bag? Birch asked warily. I found what I needed at the library pretty quickly, so I paid our friend Fingers a visit, Jinx explained nonchalantly. Who in the hell is Fingers? Captain Odom questioned, clearly puzzled. Our resident explosives enthusiast. We call him Fingers because he's lost a few over the years, Zion clarified, a faint chuckle escaping him. If that's the standard, we could have called him Marbles too, Calvin quipped, earning a laugh from Zion. So what did you pick up at the library? Birch pressed, eyeing the book curiously. Jinx tossed the book down onto the table, revealing it to be a phone book, which left everyone in the room puzzled. I gotta say I'm impressed with whoever the librarian was here. For such a small town, the reference section was awesome, Jinx remarked, picking up on their confusion. You planning on making some long-distance calls? Sergeant Dickerson joked lightly. No, but I was planning on seeing what was in town, and I'm happy to say I've found something, Jinx continued, opening the phone book to a large half-page ad for a warehouse. He turned the book around so everyone could see before walking over to the map pinned to the wall. This warehouse is on the east side of town, which is how we're going to approach it. This is going to be our first diversion, Jinx explained. Do we know what they have there? Birch asked. No clue, but based on the satellite image, there wasn't a huge number of those things around it. I'm planning on changing that. A couple of alarms pulled, maybe some light explosives, and we'll have ourselves a crowd, Jinx detailed, his voice confident. What are we going to do once they're coming our way? Won't they just come after us once the alarm dies down? Calvin interjected. Captain Odom sighed, a half-smile playing on his lips. He's going to do what he always does, which is burn the place to the ground. And hopefully take a couple of thousand of those things down in the process, Jinx added optimistically. What if there's food in there? Sergeant Dickerson asked. Then my team and I will get a snack before we set off the alarms, Jinx replied, a hint of annoyance creeping into his tone. Dickerson, I'm going to need you to make up your mind. Is this mission about food? Or is it about bullets? Because I can certainly make this about food. Hell, that would be preferable, since it would mean I wouldn't have to get into the middle of a pack of zombies 30,000 thick. Dickerson finally nodded in agreement, signaling his readiness for Jinx to continue. Good. So that's what we're going to do, Jinx affirmed. Is that going to clear out the town? Calvin asked. Probably not, but it'll be a start, Jinx said. So what are we doing after that? Birch asked. I don't have a clue, but we still have some time to figure that out. We're not making that run until the morning, Jinx explained. Completely unacceptable. You're going to wait 24 hours to start the raid. What about the militia? Captain Odom interjected. We have to assume they're going to know, which is why we're going to be staying the night in Fisher's Corner, Jinx replied, walking over to the map and pointing eastward a few miles from Canby. We're staying the night here so that we can prepare for an assault from them, Jinx clarified. If you want, Missy should have some more of those traps we can borrow, Calvin suggested. We'll pick them up on the way out of town, Jinx agreed. I'm all for being prepared, Corporal, but we have to assume the clock is ticking, Captain Odom reiterated. You're right, Captain, we are on a clock. But you have to realize that we have a few things the militia doesn't. We have a head start on them. I'm assuming we also still have eyes on the town from the drone? Jinx asked. We do. I have their frequency in your packet. And there are 2 soldiers on the boat with him, but I don't know how much help they're going to be, Dickerson confirmed. Good. And there's one more thing they don't have, Jinx added. Which is? Captain Odom asked. They don't have anybody nearly as crazy as me. So I can guarantee we're going to have the first boots on the ground, Jinx declared. Odom and Dickerson exchanged a glance, shaking their heads but ultimately agreeing with Jinx. This is your operation, Jinx. Just get it done, Captain Odom conceded. We will, Jinx assured them. Is there anything else you need? Sergeant Dickerson asked. We're good to go. Then get to it, Captain Odom urged, walking over to Jinx and extending his hand for a firm shake. Thank you for doing this. Come back safe, Odom requested sincerely. I always do, Jinx replied with a reassuring smile, trying to pull away from the handshake. However, Captain Odom held onto his hand for a moment longer, speaking softly but with conviction. I mean it. Come back safe. Jinx understood the concern coming from the captain, as this mission was bigger and more dangerous than anything that they had been out on since the invasion of Seattle. Fighting the zombies was dangerous enough, but the threat of the militia looming added an extra wrinkle. Jinx patted Odom on the shoulder, finally getting him to let go as he gave him a confident nod. Shortly after, Birch grabbed their information packet from Dickerson, and the 4 of them exited the conference room, striding towards the front of the building. As they got outside, Zion led them over to the SUV, which was sitting across the street. Let me show you what we're working with, Zion announced, swinging open the back hatch to reveal their supplies. There were baseball bats, long metal spikes, 4 backpacks filled with provisions, an entire box of hunting knives with sheaths, 4 handguns with holsters, and a single hunting rifle. Handguns only? Birch asked. Yeah, there's not enough rifle ammo to fill more than a single magazine, Zion explained. So I didn't bother. How are we looking on ammunition? Jinx asked, his gaze fixed on the handguns and rifle. We've got 2 mags each on the handguns, Zion reported. And Calvin here has 30 rounds for the hunting rifle. 150 rounds? That's nearly a third of what the town has, Jinx said. Well, I'm betting 150 rounds against a potential windfall of 20,000, Zion countered confidently. It's a good payout, no doubt. But it's not like this is a sure bet, Jinx cautioned. Back in the day when I was muscle for one of the local street gangs, they'd put on the occasional fight night, trying to bring everybody together to let them get the tension out in a safe arena rather than on the streets. And you know what I learned? Zion reflected, a grin spreading across his face. That whoever stepped in the ring with you was an idiot. Jinx guessed with a smirk. Nah, I already knew that, Zion chuckled. What I learned was, if you're gonna bet on someone, you always bet on the craziest son of a bitch in the ring. And let me tell you, Jinx, you're the craziest son of a bitch I've ever met. Jinx returned the grin, bumping fists with Zion. All right, gentlemen, let's mount up. We're burning daylight, and we have an impossible mission to tackle. Chapter 5. Birch was behind the wheel with Jinx in the passenger seat. Zion and Calvin were seated comfortably in the back seat of the SUV, the windows halfway down, taking in the scenery and enjoying the calm before the storm. As they drove down a back road, they passed a sign that read Fisher's Corner, 2 miles. It's about time to get our game faces on. We don't know what we're walking into here, Birch said. The other 3 men began checking their gear, which consisted of a few knives on various places on their bodies, 2 at the waist, 1 on each hip, and 1 on each ankle to go along with their handguns. Well, gentlemen, what we lack in firepower we more than make up for in blades. Where in the hell did you find all of these? Jinx asked. One of the guys in town was a hoarder, and he apparently got a good deal on these. They're not the highest of quality, but I tested them out, and they'll punch through some skulls, Zion replied. Good enough for me, Jinx said. As they approached the edge of town, Birch slowed down, finally stopping in the middle of the road. The 4 of them stared ahead, seeing the outskirts of town. There wasn't much movement, only a handful of ghouls milling about. Where the hell is everybody? Calvin wondered aloud. It's pretty much just a small suburb of Oregon City, which is about 5 miles to the north of here, Jinx explained. Where do you want me to go? Birch asked. Cut around to the south and head over to the west side of town. There should be some houses over there we can hang out in overnight, Jinx instructed. Birch nodded and did as instructed, heading to the south before going off-road, driving across some fields to get to the other side of town faster. As they drove, they kept an eye on the small town, which appeared to be nothing more than just a collection of neighborhoods. While there was some movement in the streets, it wasn't a tremendous amount, under 100 creatures. As they got to the west side of town, they drove up to the last street of houses, which stretched to the south of the main road that would take them to Canby. As they pulled up to the end of the road, they spotted a dozen zombies shambling in their direction. All right, gang, let's make quick work of these guys. And for the love of God, be quiet about it. We need time to rest and prepare, so I'd rather not fight off the entire town tonight, Jinx said. Everybody nodded as they got out of the SUV, heading to the back and grabbing their spikes and baseball bats. How do you want to do it? Zion asked. I think I can handle one of those spikes. It's just stab and hold, right? Calvin replied. You're with me then, Zion said. Birch, you're on me. You want the bat or the spear? Jinx asked. I'll take the spear. I'm sure after dealing with both Odom and Dickerson that you're ready to get some tension out, Birch said. Jinx chuckled as he grabbed a bat. Let's knock it out. The 2 pairs stepped away from the SUV, getting on opposite sides of the road. The creatures were pretty spread out, all of them shambling in their direction. Okay, Birch, I'm following your lead, Jinx said. Birch walked up towards the closest zombie, dropping to one knee as he thrusted his weapon forward. The tip of the long spear pierced through the zombie's chest, holding him in place. The ghoul thrashed about wildly before Jinx came around and swung the bat as hard as he could, dropping it to the ground in a heap. Before they moved up to the next one, Jinx looked over to Zion and Calvin, who had similar success with their creature. Zion gave him a nod before the 2 teams continued moving up. Over the next few minutes, the foursome dispatched every creature on the block with ruthless efficiency. As the last one fell, Jinx surveyed the houses, spotting a couple with cars still in front of them and a handful with no cars. I want every house on the east side of the block that doesn't have a car in front of it checked and cleared. Same teams. Let's move, Jinx ordered. The others didn't question the order, they simply fell in line and followed along. Jinx and Birch walked up to a house in the middle of the street, with no car in the driveway. Jinx walked up to the front door, leaning over the bush next to it and looking in through the window. It didn't look like anything had been disturbed over the last 2 months. No signs of struggle, no break-ins, nothing. Before Jinx started to break the window on the door in order to unlatch the lock, he thought for a moment before reaching down and trying the doorknob. Much to his surprise, it opened right up. "Come on. I don't think anybody's home," Jinx said. They stepped into the living room, and immediately their senses were hit with a horrific smell. "That's just foul," Birch remarked. As Birch said that, they heard moaning and movement coming from the back of the house. Both men dropped their long weapons, drawing knives and getting them at the ready. As they cleared the kitchen, they turned towards the hallway, the eerie moans and thrashing echoing down the hall. They closed in on the room, the bedroom at the end of the hall. Jinx raised his knife up to the ready, with Birch standing right behind him, ready to run back if the situation called for it. Jinx turned the doorknob and threw open the door, both men horrified at the sight before them. There was a young woman, not even 30, who was tied to the bed. Both of her wrists and ankles were attached to the frame, and no matter how much she flailed and thrashed about, the sturdy frame wasn't giving way. "That wasn't exactly what I was expecting," Birch said. "One thing about the apocalypse is that it's never predictable," Jinx replied. "If she's here, then who took her car?" Birch wondered. Jinx looked over the bedroom, spotting a picture on the dresser. It was of the young woman in a wedding dress, standing beside a well-dressed man. Jinx pointed over to it. "Looks like the husband did what he could for her. Then hit the road," Jinx said. Not without getting a souvenir first, Birch pointed to the zombified woman, who had dried blood around her mouth. "It's moments like this that remind me of my horrible, horrible ex," Jinx said. "This reminds you of your ex? How?" Birch asked. "Just like that poor son of a bitch husband of hers, I fled as far away as I could get while having my soul sucked away by her. And to add insult to injury, she got the house," Jinx explained. Birch couldn't help but let out a laugh at Jinx's expense. "It's not funny, Birch," Jinx said. "No offense, Corporal, but it's kind of funny," Birch replied. "Just go take her out. I'm going to go check on the others," Jinx said. As Jinx turned to walk out, Birch walked over to the tied-down woman. He raised the knife high before driving it into the top of her head, ending her suffering. As Jinx walked out into the front yard, Zion and Calvin came out from the house next door. "How are we looking, Zion?" Jinx asked. "It's clean, brother. Nobody home," Zion replied. "Good. There's 2 more on the street with no cars out front. Let's get them clear," Jinx said. "Why are we clearing so many houses? Don't we just need one for the night?" Calvin asked. "Because once we're clear, we're going to set up the traps that Missy and her crew made for us. We may never need them, but I think we might be glad we took the time to set them up if we have visitors," Jinx explained. Calvin nodded in agreement before he and Zion walked away to go clear the other house. As they did, Jinx stood in the yard, looking around at the row of houses across the street that led into an open field beyond that. "This may not be the best spot for a street fight, but it's far from the worst," Jinx muttered to himself. Jinx then turned around, looking through the row of houses back towards town. There was an open field that stretched for 100 yards or so before it ran into the main portion of the town, which was another neighborhood. "And reinforcements are just a couple gunshots away," he said, letting out a sigh and a bit of a horrified laugh, knowing that this had the potential to get ugly if the militia brought too many people with them. A few hours later, as the sun began to creep behind the horizon, Zion and Jinx sat out on the back patio of a house. Calvin fiddled with a charcoal grill to get it lit, as Birch came out of the house carrying some canned goods. "It's not a steak, but I found some canned meat," Birch announced. "Oh, don't you worry, I'll get that tasting just right," Calvin replied. Birch chuckled as he set the cans down on the table beside the grill and joined the other 2 on the seats. "Well, so far this has gone a bit easier than that hospital run we did a few weeks back," Zion remarked. "I wish it was going to be that easy. The hospital we could detonate and run away. This time we have to tread really carefully because we have to stick around a while after we start blowing stuff up," Jinx said. "Level with me, brother. Do you have a plan?" Zion asked. "I don't, but that's never stopped me before," Jinx admitted. Seeing Zion's worried expression, he continued, "But don't worry, We're going to be all right. It's going to be the same stuff I've been doing since my foot hit the beach during the invasion of Seattle. We run, we blow shit up, and we keep running. As long as we keep those things moving in the direction we aren't going, we'll be all right. And what happens when company arrives? Zion asked. We hopefully send those things in their direction, Jinx said. Zion laughed as he picked up a glass of flat, warm soda and raised it high. Jinx and Birch joined in with their bottles of water before chugging a good portion of it. Man, how can you drink that stuff warm? That stuff was barely good ice cold, Birch remarked. It's brand name, man. When I was a kid, we were lucky if we got the store brand stuff. Something like this you savor. Even more so now. They ain't making this anymore. I'm drinking one of the last bottles that anybody is going to drink, Zion said. Jinx thought about it for a moment before downing his water and reaching out for the bottle of warm, brown soda. He poured half a glass, prompting Birch to do the same. To living the good life while we can, Jinx toasted. The three of them clinked glasses, but before anybody drank, Jinx looked over to Calvin, who was hard at work preparing the canned meat for the grill. Sorry, Calvin. Did you want to get in on this? Jinx asked. Nah, I'm all right. I had a well-stocked childhood. My daddy worked for the distributor for much of my youth. I drank more of that stuff than water growing up. I could live to be 100 and die a happy man knowing I never had to taste that stuff again, Calvin replied. The three men laughed as they took a drink from their glasses. Both Jinx and Birch struggled to keep a happy face on, while Zion just smiled. As Calvin put the meat on the grill, a loud, satisfying sizzle filled the air. All four of the men savoring their brief moment of normality. Chapter 6. Jinx, Zion, Calvin, and Birch walked through a field just to the east of Canby, their weapons at the ready and their nerves beginning to tense up. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground. A quarter-mile ahead of them, they could see the warehouse on the outer edge of town. Despite the distance, they could see a hive of activity around it, nothing indicating humans, rather a collection of erratic movements. Good God. That's a lot of those things, Birch remarked. Gotta be 1,000 of them, Calvin observed. Jinx pulled out his radio, clicking over to the correct channel before pressing the button. Corporal Parker, do you copy? He asked. Is this the crazy bastard who's walking into town? Came the reply from Corporal Parker. Corporal Jinx, at your service, Jinx replied. It's a pleasure, Jinx. What do you need from me? Corporal Parker asked. We're on the east side of town by the warehouse, and we need to get in there. I was wondering if you could give us a hand with some surveillance, Jinx explained. My pilot Dave is already in the air and headed your way. What are you looking for exactly? Corporal Parker responded. We're a quarter-mile out, and it looks like the majority of the activity is on the western portion of the building. I'd just like to confirm and to see if there are any open bays on the east side, Jinx said. Copy that. Stand by, Corporal Parker confirmed. The group stood there for a moment, silent, hearing the faint moans in the distance. A few seconds later, they heard the high-pitched whizzing of the drone flying overhead. It took the device a few moments to do a pass around the building, but soon the radio buzzed to life again. Got some good news for you, Jinx, Corporal Parker announced. Been a minute since we've had some of that, Jinx replied. There's a bay door that's wide open about a quarter of the way up the building. It's a truck bay, so you're going to have to climb in, Corporal Parker informed them. I can live with that, because it means none of those things have gone in. So what's the bad news? Jinx questioned. Even though there's not as many of those creatures on that side of the building, there's still a couple hundred, Corporal Parker warned. If I get up ahead of steam, I might be able to clear a path, Zion suggested. That's a last resort play, Jinx said. Jinx thought for a moment, surveying the surroundings and spotting a neighborhood to their left, before speaking into the walkie-talkie again. Parker, can you have your guy check out the neighborhood? Jinx requested. Sure, what are you looking for? Corporal Parker replied. A safe spot for my shooter to take up residence, Jinx said. We're on it, Corporal Parker confirmed. The group waited as the drone flew away from the warehouse and straight towards the neighborhood. It did a flyover before the radio sprang to life again. There's some light activity in the neighborhood, and most of it is around some houses at the first intersection, Corporal Parker reported. So the end houses are good? Jinx questioned. There's a few of those things hanging out, but if your man has survived this long out here, then he shouldn't have a problem dealing with them, Corporal Parker assured. Gotcha, I appreciate the intel. We're going to be making our move here shortly, Jinx acknowledged. Okay, my pilot is going to fly back then, so he'll be charged up and ready to go when you need us, Corporal Parker informed. Copy that, Jinx replied. Happy hunting, Jinx, Corporal Parker signed off. The line went dead as Jinx began barking out orders. Calvin, get up to that house on the corner. When you're set, I want you to fire off 2 rounds towards the mob at the back, Jinx instructed. You want me to pull those things my way? Calvin confirmed. Yep, don't worry though, we're going to be pulling them back our way soon enough, Jinx assured. All right, I'll be on the roof if anybody needs me, Calvin acknowledged. Calvin exchanged a fist bump with the group before running off. Come on, let's get into position, Jinx said. Jinx led the trio through the field, maneuvering so they were behind a line of trees just on the edge of the parking lot. There was a chain-link fence surrounding the back side of the property that Birch immediately approached, carving a hole through it with his knife. Jinx scanned the back of the building, spotting the open bay door directly across from their position. He pulled out a rifle scope from his pocket, peering through it to get a better look at the scene. While there were a couple hundred creatures in the parking lot, the area by the bay door was clear. However, he could see some movement inside, but couldn't tell how much. It looks like we're going to have resistance once we get inside, Jinx observed. What are we doing once we get inside? Birch inquired. The priority is securing the floor. Take out everything you can, and we'll go from there, Jinx directed. Birch nodded as a gunshot cracked off in the distance. Moments later, another followed. The trio watched as the ghouls by the building began shambling off towards the neighborhood, drawn by the noise. Several dozen pressed against the chain-link fence, which surprisingly held up well against the push. After a couple of minutes, the crowd began to calm down, some getting distracted by the moans of other nearby creatures. The trio surveyed their path to the building, noting there were still a few dozen creatures scattered about. This is as good as it's going to get. Push through them and get to the bay door. Let's move, Jinx commanded. Jinx led the trio out from cover, rushing over to the fence and squeezing through. As soon as all 3 were through, Zion took point, readying his baseball bat as he sprinted towards the door, which was a good 100 yards away from their position. Their footfalls drew the attention of creatures, who immediately began moaning and shambling in their direction. Most of the ghouls were scattered throughout the lot, though a decent-sized congregation formed at the back of the building. Zion reached the first handful of creatures, lowering his shoulder and plowing through them like a fullback clearing the way for his teammate. He swung his bat hard at the next creature, cracking it on the side of the head and ending its unlife. Zion continued racing ahead, spotting a tall, thin zombie just ahead. The creature looked like it was barely a teenager when it turned, its body riddled with bite marks indicating a grim end to its life. Instead of running it over, Zion grabbed it by the throat, lifting it off the ground and using it as a battering ram to plow through several more creatures. Most tumbled to the ground, but a small pack remained on their feet. Without hesitation, Zion threw the young zombie towards them with enough force to send the living corpse flying through the air, knocking several others down. Zion continued leading the group towards the open bay door, which still had half a dozen zombies by it, most facing inside, attracted by something within. As they neared the door, their footsteps drew their attention. Take them down, Zion shouted. Zion rushed up to the first zombie he could find, raising his bat high in the air before bringing it down hard onto the top of the creature's skull, sending it crumpling to the ground. Birch stepped up next, using his spike as a deadly weapon, thrusting it through the eye socket of a ghoul. Jinx joined Zion in swinging the bat, both cracking several heads in a matter of seconds. He glanced over to Birch, who dispatched the final creature with a well-placed stab, clearing the way to the bay door. The three of them looked back, seeing the mob they had pushed through quickly regaining their feet and closing in. The front edge was only 10 yards away. "Let's get inside," Jinx shouted. The trio turned back towards the bay door, the lower lip of which was nearly head-high. Zion immediately took a knee and put his hands out. Jinx rushed over and placed his foot into Zion's hands. Without warning, Zion stood up, boosting Jinx into the bay. As soon as Jinx got to his feet inside, he was greeted by a zombie reaching out for him, only a yard away. "Holy shit," Jinx exclaimed. He ducked down, narrowly avoiding the outstretched arms of the ghoul as it stumbled towards the open bay door. Seeing it about to fall onto Zion and Birch, Jinx lunged forward desperately. He planted his shoulder into the back of the creature, sending it tumbling over the edge with momentum. Birch ducked down just enough for the zombie to fall over him, landing hard on the ground, smacking its head onto the pavement. Jinx immediately grabbed Birch's arm and pulled him up. "Watch my back," Jinx instructed. Birch nodded, stepping forward with his spike ready. As he did so, Jinx turned to Zion, who had stepped back from the bay door, zombies closing in on him. "I got you, man," Jinx reassured him. "Just back up," Zion replied. Jinx nodded as Zion threw his bat through the air, the metal clanging on the warehouse floor as Zion took off running. As he neared the bay door, he leaped, getting high off the ground and landing on the edge of the bay door with his gut. Jinx reached down to help him in, but by the time he reached Zion, he was already inside the warehouse. As Zion got to his feet, they glanced back at the collection of zombies shambling their way. As the ghouls congregated around the bay door, their moans drew the attention of other creatures that had wandered over to the fence. "That was some fine fullback work there," Jinx commented. "We needed to get here in a hurry, so I did what I had to," Zion replied. Jinx nodded as Zion picked up his bat. They turned to see Birch standing there with his spike, staring down the warehouse with a frightened expression. "Birch, are you good?" Jinx asked. "We're not alone in here," Birch replied. He nodded towards the dimly lit path through the warehouse. The only light came from skylights at the top of the walls, much of it blocked by stacks of boxes on either side. Despite the lack of light, they could hear moaning and the shuffling of feet in the distance. After a tense moment, a creature stepped into the light, followed by another seconds later. Soon, a dozen creatures were visible, with more behind them. "What do we do, Jinx?" Birch asked. Jinx cracked his neck before readying his baseball bat. "We're going to have to crack a few skulls." Chapter 7. Jinx, Zion, and Birch stood their ground inside the warehouse, gripping their weapons tightly as they watched a small horde of creatures shambling their way. A couple dozen ghouls emerged into the light about 40 yards down the aisle, with more moans indicating additional creatures behind them. "Birch and I can handle this," Zion asserted. "You can?" Jinx asked. "We can," Birch affirmed. "Yeah, we got this. You do what you gotta do, and we'll hold down the fort," Zion replied confidently. Birch looked over to Jinx, who nodded before running off. As Jinx sprinted towards the back wall of the building, the two remaining warriors prepared to face the approaching zombies. "Go for the heads as long as you can. If we start getting swarmed, just hold them back, and I'll handle the rest," Zion instructed. Birch nodded in agreement as he and Zion moved forward toward the next ray of light from a skylight about 10 yards ahead. They halted at the light's edge, peering into the darkness, waiting for the zombies to approach. They didn't have to wait long before the first creatures stepped into the light, their decaying forms animated as they spotted the two survivors. "Let's hit them hard," Zion yelled. Both Zion and Birch stepped up, delivering lethal blows to the first couple of ghouls before stepping back and waiting for the next ones to advance. Zion observed as one ghoul tripped over a fallen creature, tumbling to the ground. Seizing the opportunity, Zion swung his bat hard down onto the back of the ghoul's head, then spun around, striking another zombie at chest height. The metal bat cracked the side of the second zombie's head, sending it crashing into another nearby ghoul. Meanwhile, Birch deftly maneuvered, bobbing and weaving as he delivered precise thrusts with his spear. While Zion and Birch kept the mob occupied, Jinx held his bat ready as he made his way toward the back wall of the building. It was pitch dark, prompting him to pull out a flashlight. As he shone the light down the darkened aisle, he encountered a horrific scene. Several half-eaten zombies lay on the ground, too mutilated to rise on their own. Though they stirred at his presence, they posed no immediate threat. However, the trio of zombies still on their feet remained dangerous. "I picked the wrong path," Jinx muttered under his breath. Carefully navigating around the fallen ghouls, making sure to stay out of their reach, Jinx approached the first creature. With a powerful swing, he brought his bat down on its skull, effectively neutralizing the threat. It took him a minute of cautious movement, but he managed to clear the immediate area and reach the other side of the building. Shining the flashlight down the aisle, Jinx was relieved to find it mostly empty, with only a handful of creatures wandering about, none of them nearby. "Okay, I've got some time. Think, man, think. How are you going to pull this off?" Jinx pondered aloud. Glancing toward the bay doors, he noticed one on the corner of the building that looked different from the others. It extended all the way up to the roof instead of halfway. "What do we have here?" Jinx wondered aloud. Approaching the bay door, he inspected it closely and peered through a small peephole on the regular door beside it. Through the peephole, he could see a large concrete ramp leading up to the bay door. "There we go. Just have to figure out how to get you open," Jinx muttered. Jinx walked over to a box on the wall, flipping it open to reveal the controls. "Bingo, now just need some power. And a way to set this place ablaze," Jinx muttered to himself. He turned around and started examining the boxes lining the floor behind him. Large metal racks stretched across the warehouse. "Come on, there has to be something flammable in here," he muttered. Jinx walked down the row, shining his flashlight on the boxes, mostly finding random food and kitchen goods. "It's going to be a shame to waste all this food, but the bullets are the priority," he thought aloud. Continuing down the row, he finally spotted an entire metal rack filled with plastic jugs. Upon closer inspection, he realized they contained cooking oil. "Now we're cooking." Literally, it would seem, Jinx joked to himself. He made a mental note of the rack number, B13, before sprinting down the aisle towards the office area he had spotted towards the middle of the building. As he ran, he took a moment at each zombie he encountered, dispatching them with swift blows from his baseball bat. A few minutes later, he reached the center of the building, pausing before entering the office section. A single door led to the offices. Peering through the window with his flashlight, Jinx could see a scene of carnage. Dried blood covered the walls and floor, and a few gnawed-on body parts were scattered about. "Whatever happened here wasn't good," Jinx murmured, shaking his head. He leaned his bat against the wall and took out his knife. Expecting to break the lock, he was surprised to find the door opened easily with a light pull. Shining his flashlight on the lock, he noticed something jammed in the latch, preventing it from closing properly. "Let's hope that whatever was in here has wandered out by now," Jinx muttered. Jinx took a deep breath before pulling the door open and stepping through. The hallway was narrow, forcing him to press against the wall as he moved cautiously towards a door on his right. With a flashlight in hand, he aimed it into the room beyond and saw an empty office strewn with blood and bodies. The sudden light startled several figures inside, prompting them to stir and move. Jinx slammed the door shut, trapping the creatures inside. However, the noise alerted more zombies in the adjacent cubicle area. Moans and shuffling feet echoed from the cubicle farm as Jinx pointed his flashlight towards the source. 4 zombies were moving through the room, a couple of them trapped within the cubicles. Moving decisively, Jinx darted towards the nearest zombie and drove his knife into its forehead, ending its threat. But in the struggle, he lost his grip on the blade. Another zombie seized the opportunity, grabbing his shoulder. Jinx countered by ramming his shoulder into its chest, pushing it back. With 2 other zombies other than his attacker still active in the room, Jinx abandoned his knife and drew his handgun. Using the flashlight to aim, he fired 3 quick shots, neutralizing the remaining threats. Taking a moment to ensure he was safe, Jinx scanned the room with his flashlight and finally located the boss's office. He hurried over to the bookshelf and began searching through the books and folders until he found one labeled warehouse layout. I hope I'm right on this, Jinx muttered to himself. Placing it on the desk, he opened it and quickly found the emergency section. Flipping through the pages, he located information on the emergency generators. Okay, the switch for the generators is in the maintenance room, just across from the offices. Perfect, Jinx said to himself, relieved to have found a crucial piece of information. His concentration was broken by the sudden entrance of Zion and Birch, who burst into the office. Jesus, you about gave me a heart attack, Jinx exclaimed. Sorry, brother, but we heard gunfire and came running, Zion explained. Are you okay? Birch asked, concerned. Yeah, just had my hands full, that's all, Jinx replied. Did you find anything useful? Birch inquired. Yeah, I did. I know how to get the emergency power going, which we're going to need if we're going to get the ramp door open, Jinx explained. I got that bag that Fingers made for us if we need to bring the building down, Zion added. There's an easier way. Section B13. There's 1,000 gallons of cooking oil, Jinx revealed. Don't tell Calvin, he'll be deep frying stuff until the end of time, Zion joked. Sadly, he won't get the chance, because we need to start spreading that stuff everywhere. Get the containers, open them up, and start pouring. Just make sure you leave us a path to the corner opposite the one we came in at, Jinx instructed. That will be a good start once we get the fire going, Birch acknowledged. Jinx smirked as he turned the page on the binder, spinning it around to show Zion and Birch. And it'll be even better once we hit the fire alarm, Jinx pointed to the section on fire suppression. Pulling the fire alarm gets the siren going. The water release is dependent on heat. There's not going to be anything left of this place when we're done, Zion added. Let's get moving, Jinx urged. The three of them walked out of the office. Zion and Birch headed towards the section with the cooking oil while Jinx crossed the aisle towards the maintenance room. As he approached, he noticed a pile of corpses in a nearby lit area. It's a shame we don't have more time. Those two could crack every skull in town if we gave EM a chance, Jinx muttered to himself, chuckling and shaking his head at the thought. Unlocking the maintenance room door, Jinx stepped inside. The room was filled with an assortment of cleaning supplies, shelves of parts and tools, and the console he needed to operate. Making his way to the console, Jinx checked the status. Generators at 20%. That should be plenty. They'll be incinerated before they run out of gas. Jinx continued to look everything over, nodding as he saw that the water supply for the fire suppression system was filled. As soon as that water hits the cooking oil, this place is going to get hot. Jinx went ahead and hit the generator starter. He could hear them rumbling to life on the roof, taking a moment to get up to speed. A few moments later, the lights inside the warehouse began to spring to life. He stepped out into the aisle, looking towards the far end of the building where they were going to make their escape, seeing nothing but open space. Okay, let's get set up for a barbecue. Chapter 8. It had taken the better part of an hour, but the majority of the giant warehouse was now slick with cooking oil, save for a small path leading from the ramp door to the opposite back corner, where the trio prepared to make their escape. Okay, guys, are we ready to do this? Zion asked, his voice steady. About as ready as I'm ever going to be, Birch replied. Okay, you two stay put. I'll kick things off. Keep an eye on our escape route and make sure it's clear, Jinx directed. Where do you want to go? Zion inquired. Straight back through the fence. The alarm should be making enough noise to clear out the neighborhood where Calvin is, so we'll double back to pick him up and figure out our next move, Jinx explained. I like it, Zion nodded, giving Jinx a fist bump. Zion watched as Jinx began jogging to the other end of the warehouse. It took a couple of minutes, but finally Jinx reached the other side and stood by the control box. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Jinx peeked through the peephole. He let out a breath as he saw the sea of creatures just outside. While 1,000 ghouls were within sight, only a handful were on the ramp. Okay, let's get the crowd excited, Jinx said, hitting the button for the ramp door. The metal screeched as the door went up. Within moments, he could see outside, immediately catching the attention of dozens of ghouls. "What's up, everybody? It's a little chilly outside today, so why don't you come in and warm yourselves up? I'll have a fire going for you in just a minute," Jinx called out, his voice welcoming. The zombies reacted with moans of excitement, shambling towards him. Most made their way to the ramp, while several dozen pushed their way up the side. "That's no big deal. The fire is going to be hot enough to get them too," Jinx said, walking backwards down the aisle towards the maintenance room, whistling to keep their attention. He hoped the zombies outside would form an undead conga line, filing into the building one after another. Entering the maintenance room, Jinx pulled out his walkie-talkie as he approached the controls. "Calvin, how are we looking out there?" Jinx asked. "I got a couple hundred of those critters outside the house, but from what I can tell, you're getting a crowd going your way," Calvin replied. "It's about to really get going here in a minute. I'm about to hit the fire alarm, so just stay low and we'll be over to you in a bit," Jinx said. "I found a bag of slightly stale chips, so I'm good to go," Calvin added casually. Jinx chuckled, switching channels on the walkie-talkie. "Hey Parker, do you copy?" Jinx asked. "I got you, Jinx. How's it going over there?" Corporal Parker responded. "I'm just about ready to get this place burning. If you wouldn't mind, have your drone pilot on standby. Once this thing gets rolling, we should have a window to move. I'm just going to need to know where," Jinx requested. "Copy that. Dave will be on standby," Parker confirmed. "I appreciate it. I'll be in touch," Jinx replied, pocketing the walkie-talkie as he stood before the controls in the maintenance room. He paused, took a deep breath, and reached out for the fire alarm. "Here goes nothing," he muttered to himself. Jinx hit the button, and immediately there was a deafening siren piercing the air. It was so loud inside the warehouse that Jinx couldn't hear himself yell out. "That should pull them in," Jinx said. Jinx continued walking down the pathway through the cooking oil. It took another solid minute of walking until he got to the other side, where Zion and Birch were waiting. Jinx tried to say something, but he couldn't hear the words coming out of his mouth, prompting shrugs from the others. Jinx then resorted to hand signals, telling the others to head out towards the fence. The two men nodded, opening up the door and stepping out into the back of the building. There were a handful of creatures outside, but none of them were near them. The siren outside was blaring just as loudly as it was inside, with the men unable to hear themselves speak. They didn't really need to, however, as they were hyper-focused on getting to the fence. Upon arriving, Birch immediately went to work cutting through it with a knife, as Zion stood guard over him. He looked back to the door to the warehouse, where Jinx continued to stay. "Come on, man, get the hell out of there," Zion shouted. Jinx kept his head on a swivel, turning his attention to the sparse number of creatures outside and the growing number of ghouls inside. The mob that had made their way into the warehouse were still shambling through it, only just now reaching the halfway point. Jinx looked back outside, seeing that there were more and more creatures that were flowing into the back of the building. Just another minute," Jinx muttered to himself, knowing that every second he didn't set the fire was another second zombies were going to be coming this way. After another couple minutes, the zombie activity behind the building was becoming too much to ignore. He looked back down towards the mob inside, which was still a good 30 yards from him. "Close enough," Jinx said. Jinx pulled out a lighter and grabbed a nearby roll of paper towels they had pulled out earlier. He set the entire roll on fire, tossing it onto the cooking oil. It took it a moment of simmering to finally catch fire. Jinx stood there for another few seconds, watching as the oil fire continued to spread throughout the warehouse. Once it got big enough, Jinx turned and ran out the door. As soon as he hit the parking lot, he could see zombies all around him, although none were within 15 yards. He pumped his legs hard towards the fence, where Zion was waiting for him, waving him on. A few moments later, he was to the fence, both of them getting through, not speaking to each other because the siren is so deafening they wouldn't be able to hear each other anyway. They got through the fence, running alongside of it, looking over to the warehouse as more and more smoke began billowing out of it. As they got to the edge of the lot, looking back towards the neighborhood where Calvin was, they saw a ton of zombies flowing out from it, drawn by the alarm. Jinx used hand signals again to let the others know that they were going to take the long way around. As they began running, they heard an incredibly loud noise going off behind them, audible even over the alarm. They looked back and saw flames pouring out the skylights of the warehouse, the fire inside the building turning into an inferno. "Looks like the sprinkler system kicked in," Jinx remarked. Jinx exchanged a celebratory fist bump with Zion before the trio continued running. It took several minutes, but they eventually reached the edge of the neighborhood where Calvin was hiding. As they stepped onto the road, they were relieved to see that there wasn't a single zombie in sight, stretching down several blocks. A moment later, Calvin emerged from the door of the house, carrying a couple of bags of chips. He tossed them at the trio as he approached. "That was a hell of a show you put on there," Calvin remarked. "You know me, I never want to disappoint," Jinx replied. "Looks like we're in the clear for a while," Zion observed. "Let's move up a couple of blocks and get away from that alarm." "I can barely hear myself think, so talking to our drone pilot isn't going to work," Jinx suggested. The foursome nodded in agreement as they moved up the street. They managed 4 blocks before spotting a zombie, prompting them to quickly duck around the side of a house. They avoided confrontation, not wanting to draw more zombies their way. After a couple more blocks, the alarm on the building finally fell silent. "I guess the building finally collapsed in on itself," Jinx remarked. "That thing was built a lot sturdier than I thought it was," Birch commented. Jinx looked around and pointed towards a 2-story house on the corner. "Come on, let's get in there and figure out our next move." The group hurried over to the front door, with Zion leading the way. He peered through the window on the door, saw nothing moving, and delivered a forceful kick to open it. Birch rushed inside, discarding his spear and drawing his knife as he swiftly cleared the first floor. Moments later, Calvin ascended the stairs and called out that the second floor was clear. Jinx attempted to shut the door behind them, but it wouldn't latch due to Zion's earlier kick. "I'm starting to think you don't know your own strength," Jinx quipped. Zion chuckled and dragged a heavy bookcase against the door. "That ought to do for now," Zion said, satisfied with the makeshift barricade. Jinx chuckled and pulled out the radio. "All right, Parker, we're going to need an eye in the sky." He was up the moment the siren stopped going off. Corporal Parker replied promptly. "You guys could hear it all the way at the river?" Jinx asked. "Yep, and it was annoying as hell." "I can't imagine what it sounded like for you guys," Parker replied. "My ears haven't rung like this since I saw Iron Maiden a few years back," Jinx joked. "Well, your little gambit worked, because according to Dave here, you pulled in quite the crowd," Parker said. "How many are we talking?" Jinx inquired. "Probably a couple thousand caught up in the fire and collapse, and another few thousand distracted," Parker explained. "Only a few thousand distracted?" "It didn't pull all of them?" Jinx asked. "Afraid not," Parker confirmed. "The downtown area and gun shop are still crawling with those things. The good news is, it thinned them out pretty good in the neighborhood, so you should be able to move up close to downtown," Parker continued. "How close are we talking?" Jinx questioned. "Probably within a mile, give or take." "Depends on how crazy you are," Parker replied with a laugh. "So within a mile then," Jinx affirmed. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Parker asked. "Yeah, have Dave do a sweep of the neighborhood," Jinx instructed. "What's he looking for?" Parker inquired. "Anything that might go boom," Jinx replied. "That's pretty vague, Jinx," Parker remarked. "Welcome to my world. Even if it's just a backyard gas grill, that will help," Jinx explained. "Okay, I'll get him on it. I'll let you know what he finds," Parker concluded. The line went dead, and Jinx tossed the walkie-talkie down onto the couch before collapsing onto it himself. A moment later, Calvin came down the stairs as the others ripped open their bags of nearly stale chips. "I had a pretty good look at the street for the next few blocks. It's looking pretty clear," Calvin reported. "Good. As soon as Parker gets back to us, we're on the move." Chapter 9. The foursome continued to sit around the living room, enjoying their chips and a moment of rest. The radio chirped up again, interrupting their peace. "Hey Jinx, you there, buddy?" Corporal Parker's voice crackled through the radio. Jinx responded, "What you got for me?" "I'm just going to put Dave on," Parker said. Jinx could hear the radio rustling about for a moment before Dave came on the line. "Hey man, is this Jinx?" Dave asked. "The one and only. What did you find for me?" Jinx replied. Dave's voice was steady. "All right, now look, I was only able to get so low into the neighborhood, but I scanned a few houses and found a couple of grills. I couldn't tell if they were gas or charcoal though. But they're sitting right on the back porches of several houses, so you can't really miss them." Jinx couldn't hide his disappointment. "Oh well, I appreciate you taking a look for me." "Whoa now, I ain't done yet," Dave said quickly. "My apologies." "Do continue," Jinx encouraged. "Now that street that you're on right now, it runs straight into Main Street eventually. If you go down it, when you hit 9th Street, you're going to find some houses on the right side of the road that you need to check out," Dave instructed. "What makes you say that?" Jinx asked. "I can't see inside them, at least not where I need to look, but I'm pretty sure they have gas inside," Dave explained. "What makes you say that?" Jinx said. "I used to do surveying back in the day for gas companies, among others, and I recognize some of the markers they have on the ground, and I'm pretty confident they're for gas lines," Dave stated. "If you had to put a number on it?" Jinx inquired. "I'm about 80% sure," Dave admitted. "Not the best I've heard," Jinx muttered. "Hey, it's a higher percentage of confidence than I had about my first wife," Dave joked. "You're not really winning me over here, Dave," Jinx said, unimpressed. Dave let out a chuckle before continuing. "Yeah, I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could be 100% sure. But I looked all up and down that neighborhood, and I think this is going to be your best bet to get a big boom," Dave assured. Jinx contemplated for a moment before responding. "All right, Dave, I appreciate your candor. Go ahead and fly back and be ready for when I need you." "Copy that," Dave acknowledged. Jinx pocketed the radio before turning to the men, who heard the entire conversation. Calvin asked, "We're really rolling out on 80%? "It's higher than we usually get," Birch remarked. Jinx asserted, "We're going to hope it's gas. If not, we're going to have to dive into the bag that Fingers gave us." Zion nodded before tossing the bag to Jinx, who immediately began going through it. "Yeah, I think we can make it work." "Come on, let's get up there," Jinx decided. Zion pulled the bookcase away from the door before the four of them walked outside. They didn't run up the street but moved at a jogging pace, knowing they had to move quickly. As they worked their way up half a mile, they slowed down once they hit 11th Street. They could see movement up ahead on the streets, which was sparse but got thicker the further it went up. Jinx motioned for everyone to follow as they ran to the side of a house. Jinx pulled out his rifle scope, looking through it to get a read on the situation. As he spotted 9th Street, he let out a sigh, seeing that there were dozens of zombies by the target houses, and it only got thicker as they went on. "I know that sigh. That's not a good sound," Birch commented. Jinx handed the scope up to Birch, who looked through it, mirroring Jinx's sigh. "That's a lot of those things to take out," Birch observed. Zion remained confident. "It doesn't matter how many it is, we can handle it. I'm not worried about getting in, I'm worried about getting out. If there is gas in those houses, when it blows it's going to take out half the block, especially if I rig several houses. And it's going to take time to do that," Jinx said. Zion suggested, "What if we pulled them away from you? Gave you some time to work?" "That's going to be a hell of a run. Maybe 3-4 blocks past where we need to be," Jinx said, considering the plan. "We'll cut down and back a couple of blocks, pull them that way, then find a place to lay low until you blow up a block," Zion proposed. "It'll go faster if I have an extra set of hands," Jinx noted. "I'll do it. I've worked with Fingers for a while now, so I know a couple of things," Calvin volunteered. I guess that puts me on distraction duty, Birch accepted. Don't worry, I got your back, Zion assured him. Birch nodded as they exchanged a fist bump. Just give us a couple of minutes, and we'll have a clear path for you, Zion promised. You got your radio, right? Jinx asked. Yeah, I'm carrying, Birch confirmed. I'll give you a 5-minute warning before it blows, Jinx informed them. Let's do this, Birch, Zion said with determination. Zion and Birch emerged from behind the house, strolling out towards the street, their weapons firmly in their hands. They walked with confidence, ready to crack some skulls. You ready to do a little hit and run? Zion asked, his tone playful. I get the sense you've done this more than I have, so I'm going to follow your lead, Birch replied. Zion got a little smirk on his face. Oh, I know you're going to follow me, but that wasn't my question. Are you ready for some hit and run? Birch chuckled as he nodded his head and flipped his spear around to the blunt side. Oh yeah, I'm ready. Zion got a big smile as he started running towards the creatures just a block up, Birch following suit. As he reached the first pack of creatures in the street, Zion lowered his shoulder and plowed into them, sending them to the ground. He let out a primal scream as he stopped in the middle of the street. All right, assholes. You got your free lunch right here. Come and get it, Zion shouted, taunting the zombies. Birch ran by him, swinging the blunt end of his spear at a ghoul, cracking it on the side of the head and dropping it to the ground. Zion casually started walking down the street, clanging his metal bat on the pavement, sending a metallic sound through the air. He continued to yell, "All eyes on me." Zion and Birch looked around, seeing that the several dozen zombies on that block were now intently focused on them, moaning and shambling in their direction, closing the gap quickly. I know I said I was going to follow, but if you don't get moving soon, I'm going to change my mind, Birch warned. Don't worry, Birch, I ain't gonna let you down, Zion reassured him. Zion smacked his bat to the ground one more time before turning and running down the street, Birch close behind. There was a wall of ghouls just up ahead, and Zion plowed through them like they were paper. As they ran through that line, Zion continued yelling out and whistling as he led them up to the next intersection, making the turn to drop back a block. When he got down about 10 yards, there were a trio of ghouls standing there, shuffling towards him. He swung his bat hard, cracking one in the skull. As it fell, he stepped forward, delivering a forceful kick to the other's chest, sending it toppling over. Birch rushed up, spinning his spear around and stabbing the third one in the face, as Zion stomped on the skull of the creature on the ground. The two of them turned back towards the top of the street, seeing dozens of ghouls shambling in their direction. Zion let out another primal scream, making sure that the ghouls continued to focus on them. Birch turned around, thrusting his weapon towards an encroaching creature, dropping it to the ground. He looked down the street, seeing a smattering of ghouls, but nothing like what was coming from the other direction. It's looking pretty manageable back here, Birch commented. Good. Let's keep working our way back another block and over a couple more. That should give them plenty of room to work, Zion directed. Birch nodded and the two of them headed out, yelling and whistling as they went, trying to draw as much attention to themselves as they could. Meanwhile, Calvin and Jinx watched as the horde shuffled away from the target houses. Once they vanished down the street in pursuit of Zion and Birch, Jinx led them out. Come on, let's get over there, Jinx urged. The two of them sprinted out from cover, crossing the street and getting to the back door of the house. Jinx didn't worry about subtlety, using his bat to smash out the large window on top of the door. He reached in and quickly opened it up, darting inside while drawing his knife. He was barely 3 steps into the kitchen before a zombie came around the corner, startling him. The ghoul reached out forcefully, knocking the bat and knife from his hands. Jinx lost his balance, tripping over a chair and crashing to the ground, the creature pouncing on top of him. As Jinx thrashed about, trying to get the upper hand, Calvin stepped in, jamming one of his knives into the side of the ghoul's head. As Jinx did his best to hold the corpse up, Calvin gave it a forceful kick to the side, sending it to the ground beside Jinx. You gotta be a little more careful there, bud, Calvin admonished. Yeah, tell me about it. Let's sweep this place real quick, Jinx responded. Calvin nodded, and the two of them rushed through the house, relieved to find it empty. As they returned to the kitchen, they were excited to see a brand new gas stove. Jinx walked up to it, pausing with his hand hovering over the burner controls. "Tell me this is hooked up. Tell me this is hooked up," Jinx murmured, holding his breath as he pushed on the starter. He heard the clicking sound as he turned the knob. It took a moment, but the burner lit, and Jinx let out a sigh of relief that the gas was flowing. "All right, we're in business," Jinx declared. "That's a point for Dave then," Calvin acknowledged. "What do we have?" 8 devices from Fingers, Jinx asked. "Yep, all of them have the same digital timer too," Calvin confirmed. "Okay, we're going to do 2 on this side of the street and 2 more on the other," Jinx planned. "Isn't that a bit overkill?" Calvin questioned. "We're going to set them so they go off 30 seconds apart. We're not going to have sustained noise like the fire alarm, so this should continually pull the creature's attention." "In theory, at any rate," Jinx explained. "Sounds logical to me," Calvin agreed. Jinx stood there for a moment, thinking about the situation intently. Calvin noticed the thoughts going on. "What are you figuring out?" Calvin asked. "We need the biggest boom we can get. 4 of these going off is going to take out half the block, so we need time to get away too," Jinx reasoned. "It ain't going to take any time at all to set these things up. Just turn on the gas and make a run to the next house. Even if those things are inside, we can take them out quick," Calvin stated. "What do you think?" 3 minutes a house, Jinx proposed. "Set the first timer for 20 minutes and add 30 seconds for the next ones," Calvin suggested. "I'm down with it." "Let's get it done," Jinx agreed. Chapter 10. Zion and Birch continued their leisurely walk of carnage down the street, continually swinging and stabbing their weapons at everything they came across. As they reached the next intersection, they stopped and looked behind them, seeing a good 20 creatures lying on the ground in a heap. However, there were 100 more ghouls behind them, shambling in their direction. Zion looked around down the street in every direction, seeing more creatures coming their way, easily another 100 between the 3 directions. "We're a couple blocks away. I think it might be time to find a place to hide," Birch said. "See how close Jinx is to finishing up," Zion replied. Birch nodded and pulled out his radio as Zion stepped away, swinging his bat and crushing the skull of an ambitious zombie that was getting close to them. "Hey Jinx, how are we looking?" Birch asked into the radio. "We're putting the finishing touches on the 3rd house right now. About to move to the last one," Jinx responded. "Blowing up 4 houses? Isn't that a bit overkill?" Birch inquired. "I don't know the meaning of the word," Jinx retorted. Birch chuckled before continuing. "How long until this shindig kicks off?" "About 14 minutes. "Where are you guys at?" Jinx asked. "We're 1 block off the main stretch, down on 6th Street, Birch replied. "Okay, we're going to move up as far as we can after setting the last device and hide until the group you've pulled together wanders past," Jinx said. "Where do you want to meet up?" Birch asked. "Once this thing kicks off, head south 2 blocks, and we'll meet up on the corner at 6th, Jinx instructed. "Copy that." "Hey Zion, did you get all that?" Birch called out. "Yeah, 12 minutes until showtime," Zion confirmed, stepping up and cracking another zombie over the head before looking around and seeing creatures moving in from every direction, getting within 30 yards of them. "How about the 2-story on the corner?" Birch suggested. "Whichever one you want. Just know that I don't do yard work," Zion quipped. Birch let out a chuckle as he playfully smacked Zion on the chest. "Come on, let's go see if anybody's home." The 2 of them ran over to the house on the corner, a large 2-story house with a decent-sized yard. The yard was elevated just a bit off the street, high enough that there were half a dozen steps at the front walk. The house itself was up a couple of steps as well, providing them a little extra protection from the mob. They rushed to the front door, but before Zion could kick it in, Birch grabbed his arm, trying the door, but finding it locked. "Can I kick it in now?" Zion asked. "Let me try something first," Birch replied. Birch pulled out his knife, jamming it between the door and the frame before forcefully hitting the hilt. Like magic, the door popped right open. "Welcome home," Birch said. Zion smirked as he walked through the door, setting his bat down and pulling out a knife as he made his way through the house. As Birch slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt, they both heard movement coming from upstairs. They listened intently, making out that it was just a single set of footsteps. They looked around, finding the stairs pretty quickly and making their way over to them. Before they could start walking up, a morbidly obese zombie staggered out from the bedroom, standing at the top of the stairs and letting out a moan as it noticed the two men. "Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and back up." "This ought to be good," Zion said. The two men watched as the zombie took a single step on the stairs, misjudging it and falling face first onto the wooden stairs with such force that it cracked the boards. The ghoul did a full flip before swinging down hard and landing face first on the edge of the first step. Despite being several feet away, both Zion and Birch could hear the crack of the neck from the impact. They stood there for a moment, making sure the big boy zombie was down for the count. "And the German judge gives him a 9.6, Birch said. 9.6? My man here did a full front flip while weighing as much as a small car. That's at least a 9.8, Zion countered. "What can I say? The German judges are notoriously stingy when it comes to points," Birch replied. Both men laughed a bit until they heard banging on the front door. They immediately snapped back to the moment, walking back over to the front of the house, looking out. Birch let out an impressed whistle. "Man, that's a lot of dead bodies," Birch observed. "And they're going to be getting some exercise here soon when those houses go up," Zion added. A moment later, the duo heard a crash coming from the back of the house. They immediately took off running, readying their weapons, Zion with a knife and Birch with his spear. As they got to the back of the house, they saw the back patio door crash down onto the floor, a handful of creatures pushing their way in. "Get your bat," Birch shouted. As Zion ran back to the front of the house, Birch stepped forward, thrusting his spear into the chest of the lead creature, doing everything he could to shove the ghouls back through the door. Despite his efforts, the zombies were holding their ground. Zion returned, bat in hand, but rather than start smacking zombies down, he set it on the counter and grabbed onto the spear. "I'll hold them up, you swing," Zion instructed. Birch didn't argue the point, knowing that Zion was far stronger than he was. Zion planted his feet, leaning forward with every bit of his weight. This caused the spear to slide further into the zombie's chest and begin to pierce the next creature as well. Zion let out a grunt, shoving them back through the opening, even as a couple more zombies joined the back of the pack. Once they were in place, Birch stepped up and swung hard, cracking the lead zombie's skull, causing it to go limp. The extra dead weight on the spear nearly caused Zion to drop it, but he held on. Zion dug in, lowering the back of the spear to the ground and putting it against his foot to help brace it. "Look out the window. Tell me what you see," Zion requested. Birch did as requested, getting over to the window and looking around. The backyard of the house was on a fairly steep hill, and it was clear that the creatures were having trouble climbing up it. As he looked side to side, he noticed that the only creatures at the back of the house were the 6 in the doorway. "This is the only group we got. There are a few down at the street, but that hill is too much for them," Birch reported. "Okay, get out there and clear them out from behind," Zion ordered. Birch thought about it for a moment before nodding and immediately rushing back over to the window. He unlatched it carefully and raised it up as quietly as he could before stepping out into the yard. He moved slowly, hoping not to draw any attention to himself. However, one of the zombies at the back took notice of him and began shambling his way. Birch acted quickly, swinging the bat and cracking the skull in a single blow. He then moved up behind the small pack of ghouls still pushing to get into the house. One by one, he cracked them over the top of the head, dropping them to the ground in a heap. None of them ever saw it coming. As the last one fell, the pressure on the spear was relieved, and the zombies holding it up slumped to the ground. Zion pulled out the spear before tossing it over to Birch. "Let me have my bat back," Zion said. Birch nodded and did as instructed, gladly taking back his spear. "What do you want to do?" Zion thought about it for a moment before looking down the hill, seeing only a handful of zombies on the street. Let's bounce. Those things out front will keep themselves entertained until the neighborhood goes up. Birch nodded, and the two men slid down the hill towards the road below. As they put boots to pavement, they quickly dispatched the handful of creatures around them. After clearing the immediate threats, they looked around, not seeing much of anything in the way of zombies. "Come on, let's get to the rally house," Birch said. On the other side of the neighborhood, Jinx and Calvin made their way to the final house, breaking in through the back door with relative ease. As soon as they entered the house, they heard moaning coming from the back bedroom. "I got it," Jinx said. Jinx moved quickly to the hallway, seeing that all the doors were closed. He walked down to the end, checking all the doors as he went to make sure they were secure. As he got back to the kitchen, he saw Calvin struggling with the oven, trying to pull it out from the wall. Jinx watched with a bit of amusement as he watched him continue to struggle, the oven not moving an inch. Finally, Calvin noticed him. "Well, you gonna stand there and stare at me like a damn fool? Or are you going to help me?" Calvin asked. A few more seconds of staring. "Then I'll help," Jinx replied. Calvin stopped pulling, putting his hands on his hips and giving Jinx an "are you for real" look, prompting Jinx to break out into laughter. "All right, come on, let's get this moved," Jinx said. Jinx and Calvin each took one side of the oven, counting it down before pulling in unison. It was incredibly heavy, but they managed to get it out from the wall. Jinx climbed up onto the counter, laying down on it and reaching behind the oven. He unscrewed the gas line and immediately smelled gas. "Oh yeah, it's flowing pretty good," Jinx remarked. Calvin pulled out another explosive device, making sure it was the one with the timer going, as they had set them all at the same time. As he set it on top of the oven, both men looked at the timer on it, just crossing over 11 minutes. "We should move, cause in 8.5 minutes. The property value around here is going to take a serious hit," Calvin said. Jinx chuckled as he tapped Calvin on the chest in a playful manner, as if he was celebrating what they had set up. As they walked out of the kitchen and by the front living room windows, Jinx saw a glint of light coming from across the street. He turned just in time to see someone aiming a rifle towards them. "Get down," Jinx shouted. Jinx immediately dropped to the ground, grabbing Calvin by the shirt and dragging him down as well. A split second later, bullets started to pour through the front of the house. Both men stayed down as the bullets continued to rip through the front of the house, sending glass and debris flying everywhere. Jinx quickly reached down for his radio, clicking it on and yelling into it. Parker, are you there?" Jinx called out. "Yeah, I'm here, Jinx. What the hell is that noise?" Corporal Parker responded. "We have shooters across the street from us, and I need eyes on," Jinx said urgently. Parker yelled over the radio, but not into it. "Dave, get that thing in the air and haul ass to the neighborhood." Parker then went back to the radio. "All right, Jinx, he's off. He'll be on your position in 2 minutes." Jinx looked down at his watch, seeing the countdown for the house across from them. "Good, that means we'll have a little more than 5 minutes to figure out what we're doing before stuff starts exploding." Chapter 11. Jinx and Calvin continued to stay on the floor of the front room as the occasional bullet flew through the window. Both drew their guns, Jinx with a handgun and Calvin with his rifle. Jinx quickly changed the channel on his radio. "Birch, we're in trouble." "Where are you guys at?" Jinx asked urgently. "We're at the fallback house. What's happening?" Birch responded. "The militia showed up," Jinx replied. "Damn it." "We're on the way," Birch said, sounding determined. "No, stay where you are," Jinx instructed firmly. "But Jinx," Birch began. "We got the bombs set, and in 4 minutes this block is going up. We're getting the hell out of here. Just be ready to cover us when we're hauling ass down the street," Jinx explained. "Copy that," Birch agreed. Jinx quickly switched the channel on the radio, hearing nothing but silence. "Come on, Dave, get that thing over here," he muttered. Calvin began scooting up towards the front window, peeking out the corner of it, prompting Jinx to do the same. "You want to take our chances at the back?" Calvin suggested. "We will," but we need to keep them occupied for a couple of minutes. If we're going to blow this neighborhood to hell, we might as well take some of them out in the process, Jinx replied. Calvin looked over to one of the houses without a bomb that was just out of the blast zone. He could see some movement at the very top of the roof. Got a sniper on the roof. 9 o'clock, Calvin reported. Jinx poked his head up, looking out the window towards one of the rigged houses. He spotted a couple of militia men beside it, taking cover and aiming their weapons towards the house. Jinx raised his handgun, firing a couple of shots towards them, prompting return fire. Both men inside the house ducked down to avoid the incoming fire. That ought to keep them agitated for a minute, Jinx said. Jinx looked over and could see that Calvin was adjusting his scope on his rifle. Do you have a shot at the sniper? Jinx asked. Calvin peeked back out of the window before ducking back down again. I don't. He's almost completely behind the roof, Calvin responded. Don't worry about it then. As soon as that first house goes up, we're out of here, Jinx said. That's the problem. I may not have a shot at him, but I'm pretty sure he's going to have a shot at us when we head out. He has a full view of the street, Calvin pointed out. A moment later, the radio sprang to life. Jinx checked his watch, seeing there was only 3 minutes left before the first house detonated. Jinx, are you there? Corporal Parker called out. Glad you didn't forget about me, Parker. Where's my eye in the sky? Jinx replied. Dave began yelling into the radio, his voice getting louder as Parker moved closer to him. You got a swarm of those assholes on you, Dave reported. Yeah, thanks, Dave. We kind of figured that part out. Where are they? Jinx asked. You got 3 around the house across the street and 1 guy on a rooftop, Dave explained. Are they anywhere else? Jinx asked. I didn't see any, but they could be inside a house, Dave answered. A few more bullets flew through the window, prompting Jinx to fire a couple more shots in return. He looked at his watch, seeing the time ticking down towards 2 minutes. Calvin, how quickly can you get a shot off? Jinx asked. I need a split second and a target, and I'll take his head right off, Calvin responded confidently. Jinx thought about it for a moment before nodding to him. Get in position, I'm going to give you your split second, he said. Jinx pulled the radio back up to his mouth. Got a random question for you, Dave. How many of those drones do you have? He asked. I got about half a dozen of them. Why? Dave responded. Good. Because I'm going to need you to sacrifice that one, Jinx said. Sacrifice it? This thing isn't exactly armed, Dave replied, sounding confused. I'm aware, but we don't need it to be, Jinx said. Okay, what do you need me to do? Dave asked, now curious. Do you see the sniper on the roof? Jinx inquired. Yeah? Dave answered. I want you to crash the drone into him, Jinx instructed. There was a long pause on the line before Dave responded. I'm sorry, you want me to do what? He asked, incredulously. I want you to dive bomb that asshole. Jinx repeated. This drone only weighs a few pounds. It's not going to do much to him, Dave protested. Jinx looked at his watch, seeing the time ticking down. I don't need it to hurt him. I just need him to pop his head up. Now do it before we get incinerated, he ordered. All right, here goes nothing, Dave agreed. Jinx nodded to Calvin, who backed up from the window and took a knee, aiming his rifle towards the roof of the house across the street. He knew it was a risk to expose himself, but he didn't have a choice. A few seconds later, he saw the drone dive bomb the top of the house, bouncing off the man on the roof. The sniper was startled by the unexpected strike and instinctively moved, popping his head just above the threshold of the house. Calvin squeezed the trigger as soon as he saw the forehead, which was quickly followed by a splurt of blood popping out the back of the skull, the man falling lifeless on the roof. Got him, Calvin exclaimed. The gunfire outside intensified, forcing both men to hit the deck. Jinx looked down at his watch, seeing that there was less than a minute before the first detonation. We have to move. Get to the back, Jinx ordered. Calvin nodded and began crawling quickly along the floor, getting to the back of the house, He popped up, looking out to make sure the coast was clear. While he didn't see any militiamen, he knew they could be lurking inside. Jinx popped up, firing the remainder of his magazine at the gunman across the street. As the gun clicked empty, he stood up and started running to the back of the house. As he ran, the bullets continued pouring through the front of the house. "Go, go, go," Jinx shouted. Jinx and Calvin rushed through the back door as Jinx loaded in a fresh magazine. As they ran, he glanced down at his watch, seeing the timer tick down towards 0. Both men pumped their legs hard as they heard shots continue to go off behind them. A few seconds later, they heard a deafening boom as the first house detonated. The shock wave from the blast sent them stumbling to the ground as the windows around them shattered. "Are you good, Calvin?" Jinx asked. "Yeah, just a little shook. That's all. I'll live though," Calvin replied. Jinx looked down at his watch, seeing that the countdown continued, with only 10 seconds left before the next blast. "Come on, we have to get away from the blasts before they hit this side of the street," Jinx urged. Calvin nodded as the two men got up and continued running, this time prepared for the blast. The extra distance they put between them and the explosion allowed them to keep their feet under them, continuing to run. Over the next minute, they sprinted away from the blasts, which continued to fill the air, darting by a handful of zombies that were being drawn to the noise. The duo cut through a yard to stay out of sight from the creatures, relieved that nobody was taking a potshot at them from a window as they ran by house after house. After a couple of minutes of running, they spotted the meet-up house, which was completely quiet. As they came out from beside a house, they saw the front door open, Zion standing in the doorway, waving them over. As they approached, Zion stared out into the neighborhood, looking for trouble but not finding any. "Come on, get inside," Zion urged. Jinx and Calvin rushed in, Zion closing the door behind them. They all walked into the living room, which had the curtains pulled and Birch keeping watch. "Glad you guys made it out okay." "I was starting to get worried," Zion said. "It was a little closer than I would have liked. But Calvin here taught them a lesson," Jinx replied. Calvin did a half shrug. "I don't like it when they shoot at my friends," he said. "It's true. He really doesn't," Zion added. "How are we looking out there?" Jinx asked Birch. "I don't see anything moving except for those things, and they're all moving towards the explosions," Birch reported. "Good. Now let's see if that's true everywhere," Jinx said, pulling out the radio and dialing it up to the right channel. "Hey Parker, are you there?" Jinx called out. "Thank God you're still there. Were you able to take care of that sniper?" Corporal Parker responded. "Thanks to Dave, we were," Jinx confirmed. "He's got another bird in the sky. I'll put him on," Parker said. "Hey Corporal, did my bird do its job?" Dave asked. "And then some. We might not be here if it wasn't for you," Jinx replied. "Just doing my part," Dave said. "Well, Dave, your part isn't over yet. I need to know how we're looking in the town," Jinx said into the radio. "I'm flying that way now, but I have to take a bit of a detour around the smoke. You boys really did a number on those houses," Dave responded. "What can I say? It's a hobby of mine," Jinx quipped. "Okay, coming up on the other side of the diversion. So the good news is, it looks like it worked pretty well. There are a few thousand of those things moving in that way," Dave reported. "So what's the bad news?" Jinx asked, bracing himself. "The bad news is, a few thousand of those things are moving your way. And they're everywhere." "Where are you boys now?" Dave asked. "A few blocks to the south and west of the explosion," Jinx replied. Dave went silent, prompting everyone in the room to look around at each other, concerned. "Hey Dave, you want to fill us in on what you're seeing? Because your silence is a little scary," Jinx urged. "You need to get out of that house, right now," Dave said urgently. "That's the plan. We're going to head south to the outskirts of town and move around towards downtown," Jinx explained. "That's not an option," Dave countered. "What the hell do you mean that's not an option?" Jinx asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "There's a swarm of those things coming out from the cars that are parked in the fields down there. Easily hundreds of them," Dave warned. We can push through them, Zion said confidently. No, I don't think you can. Those things are packed thick, Dave advised. Can we get to downtown? Jinx asked. Not unless you have a battering ram. About half of the population of downtown is marching your way. Thousands of those things, Dave reported. Shit. There's movement outside, Birch said, looking through a crack in the curtain. Jinx got up, rushing over to the window and looking out. Backyard of the house across the street, Birch said. Jinx focused his attention there, spotting a couple of militiamen moving through the yard, looking for them. This just keeps getting better and better, Jinx muttered. He went back to the radio. How much time do we have before the mobs hit us? Jinx asked. Best guess? 10 minutes for the one to the south, and about 15 for the one from downtown, Dave estimated. Jinx looked around the room, the men having concerned looks on their faces. I'm open to suggestions, he said. Jinx remained silent as he looked each man in the eye, all three of them giving a subtle head shake, letting him know they didn't have any idea of what to do. Dave, I need you to listen to me carefully. In 10 minutes, we're going to be stuck here. You're the only person who has eyes on the situation outside. We need a way out of here, and fast. Chapter 12. As the minutes ticked by, Jinx, Birch, Zion, and Calvin waited patiently in the living room of the small house. Birch continued to look out the window, watching as a smattering of zombies shambled by the house and a handful of militiamen looked through the houses across the street. Those boys aren't going anywhere. Whatever we're going to do, it's going to involve a firefight, Birch said. It ain't going to be much of one, since all we got are these pea shooters. Zion replied, holding up his handgun and shaking his head. Jinx made a waving motion to him. Let me get your extra mag, Jinx requested. Zion nodded, grabbed it, and tossed it over to him without questioning the request. You're going to be better using it than I am, he said. After another few seconds, the radio sprang back to life. You still with me, Corporal? Dave's voice crackled through. We're here, Dave, hoping you have some good news for us, Jinx responded. I think I might have found a way out of there for you, Dave said. Now we're talking. What do you have? Jinx asked. There's a manhole cover in the middle of the road in front of you, a block and a half to the west, Dave informed them. A manhole cover? That's the best you can do, Jinx exclaimed. I'm afraid so, Corporal. None of the vehicles I've seen are going to be powerful enough to punch through hordes that size, and that's assuming they even start after sitting this long, Dave explained. Fantastic. When you were flying over, did you see any militia movement? We can see a couple of guys across the street, but as soon as we make a move, there's going to be a hell of a lot of noise. I just want to know what we're in for, Jinx said. I spotted at least 5 of them patrolling your area, Dave reported. While we make a run for it, I want you to keep patrolling and see how many you can spot, Jinx directed. I'm on it, Dave replied. Okay, Dave, I appreciate the help. Put Parker on, Jinx said. A few seconds passed before the voice came through the radio again. I don't envy you boys, Corporal Parker admitted. I bet. Now look, you guys need to keep alert. The militia is swarming around here, and it's likely they've spotted the drone. They may come looking for you, Jinx warned. We'll be on high alert. There's only 2 of us here besides Dave, though, Corporal Parker noted. I wish we didn't need you to stick around, but we do, Jinx said. Don't worry, Jinx, we aren't going anywhere, Corporal Parker assured him. Glad to hear it. I'll be in touch, Jinx said. Jinx clicked off the radio and pocketed it as the men snapped their attention to him. Zion, get out to the garage and see if you can find something to pull open the manhole cover, Jinx ordered. On it, Zion replied. Calvin, do you think you can sneak out the back and hightail it down to some cover close to the manhole? We're going to need some cover to get it open, Jinx asked. They'll never see me coming, Calvin assured him. As Calvin walked by, he pulled out his extra handgun magazine and handed it over to Jinx. Just to be clear, I'm not like Zion. I don't think you'd use it better than me. "But I think you're going to need it more than me," he said with a chuckle and a wink, prompting the same response from Jinx. "When we get this ammo, we're having a shooting contest," Jinx said. "Just remember the golden rule. Don't bet more than you can afford to lose." Calvin laughed as he headed to the back door. Jinx moved up to the window where Birch was keeping watch. "What are you seeing?" Jinx asked. "Two guys are clearing the last house on that block," Birch replied. Jinx readied his handgun, checking to make sure it was fully loaded. "If they so much as look at this house, we're firing," Jinx declared. "Copy that," Birch confirmed. As the two men stared intently across the street, watching as the two militiamen exited the house, Zion came back in from the garage carrying a tire iron. "I'm pretty sure this will work," he said. Jinx nodded without looking back at him, keeping his focus on the front of the house. They watched intently as the two militiamen walked towards the street, moving to crack the skull of a wandering zombie with the butt of their assault rifle before stopping. They watched as the two men looked at the house, as if they were trying to decide where to go next. "Go the other way. Go the other way," Jinx pleaded to the universe. His pleas went unanswered as the two heavily armed men turned and looked at the house they were in. They started walking towards it with their rifles down, however. They appeared to be on alert. "Damn it," Birch cursed. "What is it?" Zion asked. "Company," Jinx replied. "Let's just get out the back and go then," Zion suggested. Jinx looked down at his handgun, realizing that it wasn't going to be much of a match for the assault rifles that the militiamen were armed with. "We need their weapons," Jinx said. "Agreed," Birch added. "Where are they?" Zion asked. Cutting across the grass and heading straight for the door, Jinx informed him. "You just be ready to shoot. I trust you," Zion said, giving Jinx a nod before running to the back of the house. Zion burst through the door, running to the far side of the house as he pulled out his handgun. He got to the corner of the house, looking back towards the two militiamen, who were just a few yards away from the front window where Jinx and Birch were waiting. Zion bided his time, waiting on them to get in front of the house where there wasn't any immediate cover. As soon as they were, he poked his head out from around the corner of the house, aiming his handgun in their direction. "Fuck y'all," Zion shouted, pulling the trigger a few times and missing badly, but succeeding in getting their attention. Immediately, they raised their rifles and returned fire as Zion went back behind the cover of the house. Inside the house, Jinx and Birch waited to pounce, watching the militiamen raise their rifles and fire just outside their position. Now, Jinx and Birch both fired simultaneously, squeezing the trigger several times and unloading onto the two gunmen. Both of their aims were spot on, hitting the men in the side of the head and dropping them. "Come on, we gotta move," Jinx urged. Both Jinx and Birch broke from their position, getting to the front door and dashing out into the front yard. They rushed over to the fallen gunmen, grabbing their assault rifles and the spare magazines they had on their vests. Before they could gather all of the ammo, however, bullets flew their way, peppering the ground around them. "Contact! Contact!" Jinx shouted, raising his rifle and firing across the street, where a couple more militiamen were firing back at them. Birch grabbed what he could, forced to leave a couple of magazines behind as the two of them took off running, firing behind them as they went. As they approached the corner of the house where Zion was, the big man popped out from behind cover, firing his handgun several times towards the direction of the attackers. "I appreciate you boys being a good shot," Zion said. "Don't mention it. Now you two move up to the next house," Jinx instructed. As Birch and Zion headed towards the backyard of the next house, Jinx held his position, firing back towards the attackers, only to be driven back behind cover due to return fire. When he came back around to start shooting again, he saw two men moving up to the next house across the street. Jinx fired off a couple of erratic shots in their direction as he turned and ran. Within seconds, bullets were flying in his direction, narrowly missing him. As he got to the back of the house, Birch was there, ready to provide cover, but Jinx yelled at him as he ran by. "Forget them, let's move," he commanded. The three men started running as hard as they could, trying to put some distance between them and the militia, knowing that they were going to need time to get the manhole cover open. As they got to the intersection, they saw one militiaman running across the street, trying to get ahead of them. Jinx raised his weapon to fire at him, but before he could, a shot rang out from just ahead. Jinx looked over and saw the man's gut explode, sending him to the ground in immense pain. Jinx then looked ahead, seeing the barrel of Calvin's rifle sticking out from a treehouse a few yards up. "That boy can shoot," Jinx remarked. The three of them ran along the backs of the houses, trying to get parallel with the manhole. As they ran, they didn't hear any more shots coming from Calvin, signaling that the other militiamen were lagging behind. "Come on, now's our chance," Jinx urged. The three of them ran out to the road, with Zion making a beeline for the manhole, while the other two set up position on either side of him. They were looking in opposite directions, with Jinx focusing on the direction they came from and Birch looking the other way. "Get that manhole open," Birch ordered. "I'm working on it," Zion replied. "Get it open now," Birch urged with a hint of panic in his voice. Zion looked up to see what Birch was seeing a couple of blocks away was a wall of ghouls, shambling together shoulder to shoulder, taking up nearly the entirety of the road. Zion muttered curses under his breath, redoubling his efforts to get the escape route open. Jinx was startled as Calvin's rifle went off, forcing him to scan the houses intently. Despite his best efforts, he didn't see anybody. A moment later, another shot went off from Calvin, followed by automatic gunfire coming from one of the houses, aimed at Calvin. "I got it open," Zion shouted. The manhole cover clattered to the ground as Zion looked down into the sewer. Despite the smell, he didn't hesitate to get down the ladder. As he went, Jinx looked over to the treehouse, watching as Calvin flung his legs over the side and dropped to the ground. "Birch, get down there," Jinx ordered. He raised his weapon and fired towards the house down the street, aiming for the window the gunfire was coming from. He knew he wasn't going to hit them from this distance, but he needed to buy Calvin time. As Birch descended, Calvin came hobbling out from between the houses, raising his rifle towards the house. "I got them covered. Get your ass down the ladder," Jinx shouted. Calvin slung his rifle over his shoulder, groaning with every step as his leg was clearly bothering him. Despite the pain, he managed to get to the manhole quickly, sliding down the ladder. Jinx did the same, quickly climbing down the ladder, but grabbing the manhole cover and pulling it towards him. Before clicking it shut, he looked back in the direction Birch was looking, seeing the huge mob of ghouls headed his way. "Mother of God," Jinx muttered. He shook off the shock, getting into the manhole and pulling the cover on top. It snapped into place mere seconds before the front edge of the mob reached them. As he got to the bottom, splashing down into the muck, he pulled out his flashlight and shined it around. "Is everybody okay?" Jinx asked. "Tweaked my knee pretty good getting out of that treehouse," Calvin replied. "Can you walk on it?" Jinx asked. "Yeah, I'll manage. But I'm definitely taking tomorrow off," Calvin joked. Jinx let out a chuckle as Zion gave his friend a confident shoulder squeeze, prompting a smile from Calvin. Jinx took point, shining the light down the dingy sewer, seeing that it stretched on further than the light could currently penetrate. "Our undead friends on the street are protecting our escape, so we don't have to worry about being followed. And this looks like the way to downtown. So let's get moving." Chapter 13. Jinx led Zion, Birch, and Calvin down the dank sewer, the stench surprisingly not as bad as the one on the surface, thanks to the tens of thousands of undead. They walked for several minutes, the only sounds consisting of the splashing of their boots in the sewer water and the moans coming from the street above. While they could barely hear it from underneath the street, when they crossed over another manhole cover, it was very loud. "Do you have any idea where we are, Jinx?" Birch asked. "We should be getting pretty close to downtown unless I'm mistaken," Jinx replied. They continued walking, making a couple of turns before running into a dead end. The pipes just ended, running through a brick wall with two small enclaves on either side that stretched on for several yards. Jinx shined his flashlight down each of them, seeing that while the pipes went that way, the rooms were enclosed with no other way to go. "I guess this is the end of the line," Jinx said. "Did we go through downtown?" Calvin asked. "I don't think so," Jinx replied. "Then where's the rest of the sewer?" Calvin questioned. "It probably continues down a ways. If this is Main Street, they may have added walls like this for added support due to the extra traffic," Birch speculated. Do you know that for real? Or are you just bullshitting? Zion inquired. Birch shrugged and smirked. I don't know, it sounded like it made sense. Zion chuckled as he shook his head. Meanwhile, Jinx pointed his flashlight up a ladder right up to a manhole. There wasn't much daylight coming through it, however. Every now and then, a ray or two would pierce through the small holes. Jinx handed the flashlight over to Calvin as he began climbing up the ladder. And just where in the hell do you think you're going? Birch asked. We need to know where we are. Relax, though. I'm just opening it up a crack, Jinx reassured him. Birch nodded but still pulled out his handgun, just in case. Jinx climbed to the top of the ladder, trying to look through the small holes in the manhole cover, but not able to see much. However, he could hear a lot of moaning. This is a dumbass idea, Jinx, he muttered to himself. While he knew that was the case, he also knew he needed to know where he was. With a deep breath, he pushed on the manhole cover, getting it to move ever so slightly. Jinx raised the manhole cover just a few inches, just high enough for him to be able to look out. He nearly dropped back down when he saw hundreds of shambling feet stretching out down the road, but he steadied himself, thinking. You're fine, man, just figure out where you are, he told himself. Jinx took another deep breath and started looking around. It took him a moment of scanning the stores before spotting the one he wanted, the gun store. It was to his left, but on the far end of the block. Bingo, he whispered. Jinx continued to study the layout of the block, seeing that the gun store was connected to a couple of other businesses, the individual buildings all running together and taking up the entire block. Jinx then glanced back down, seeing that the small breakaway tunnel that was self-contained seemed to run right over to the hardware store on the corner. He did some distance calculations in his head before dropping back below the surface and sliding down the ladder. What did you find? Zion asked. Jinx didn't answer instead. He grabbed his flashlight and started walking down the tunnel. He counted his steps as he went, following the pipe before stopping at the end, seeing that the pipe went up. Jinx, buddy, you want to clue us in on what you're up to? Birch called out. How far apart do you think we are? 25? 30 feet? Jinx asked. About that, Birch replied. Does that seem like about how far it is from the middle of the street to the middle of a store? Jinx continued. That sounds about right to me. I'm not sure what good that does us, though, Birch admitted. I'm pretty sure that there's a bathroom just above us, Jinx pointed upwards as he talked. I'm with my man Birch on this one. There's got to be a couple of feet of concrete above you there. How does that do us any good? Zion interjected. Calvin, Jinx said. Everybody turned around to Calvin, who was confused for a moment, until it hit him. You're out of your goddamn mind, Jinx, Calvin exclaimed. We know that, but why specifically this time? Birch asked. Calvin let out a sigh as he grabbed the bag that Fingers had prepared for them. As he tossed it over to Jinx, both Birch and Zion realized what was happening. Yep, that qualifies as out of your damn mind, Birch remarked. Jinx pulled out one of the devices before slinging the bag over his shoulder. The gun store is at the other end of the block, but all of the buildings run up against each other. So if we can get into the hardware store here, we can get up to the roof and over, Jinx explained. Yeah, and all we have to do is blow up part of downtown, Birch commented. Sounds like fun to me. Let's do it, Zion said. Jinx nodded and put 2 minutes on the timer before activating it. He reached up, putting the device on top of the pipe that led to the bathroom above before running back around the corner. Just for safety, the men moved down the sewer a bit, waiting in silence for the explosion. They didn't have to wait long, as the explosion soon rattled the sewer. Smoke and debris filled the air, rocketing down the enclosed space, covering the men in it. There were a few tense moments where they couldn't see, but soon the dust settled, and they were relieved to find that they were alone. They made their way towards the new opening, which went all the way up into the store. Despite their ears ringing, they could hear moaning coming from up above, putting them on edge. Was the door to the building closed? Birch asked. Yeah, it was, Jinx confirmed. Zion stepped forward, gripping his bat tightly as he looked up. The ledge into the bathroom was about 8 feet above them, and there was some rebar sticking out from the broken concrete. "I'll make sure it's clear," Zion said. Zion handed his bat to Jinx as he began his ascent. It only took a few moments for him to pull himself up to the bathroom. He saw that the door was closed but was moving as something pushed against it. "Bat! Bat!" Zion called out. Jinx tossed the makeshift weapon up to Zion, who caught it and got it into the attack position. A few seconds later, a creature forced its way into the bathroom, struggling against the weight of the heavy wooden door. Zion darted forward, delivering a crack on the top of the head with the bat, dropping it to the ground. Seconds later, another creature started to push its way in, meeting the same fate. Zion stood there, ready to strike as the other three climbed up into the bathroom, which was completely destroyed by the blast. Once everybody was up, Zion took charge. "There's 2 down, but I hear something else out there," he said. "Birch, stay here with Calvin. We're going to go check it out," Jinx instructed. Birch and Calvin didn't complain. They just complied, watching the 2 others step out into the heart of the hardware store. As they got into the main portion of the store, which was an open layout with several aisles on either side of the center, they heard some moaning. The 2 of them quickly swept the area, only spotting a couple of creatures shambling about, which Zion dispatched quickly. There was a collection of moans coming from the front corner of the store, but no movement. As the 2 men walked up, they saw 3 creatures pinned underneath a giant gun safe. They all thrashed about, desperate to break free but unable to. "You want to do the honors?" Jinx asked. "With pleasure," Zion replied. As Zion put them out of their misery, Jinx headed back towards the bathroom, calling out, "We're clear in here." Birch and Calvin walked out, everybody heading towards the front of the store and looking out at the street, which was completely covered in zombies. A lot of the ghouls pressed against the front window, excited for the fresh meat in front of them, but the window held. They stared for several moments, almost mesmerized by the sight before Jinx snapped them back to the mission. "Come on, let's figure out how we're getting onto the roof," Jinx said. The 4 of them looked around but didn't see a hatch or anything leading up to the roof. However, there was a skylight in the middle of the ceiling. Jinx and Zion stood underneath it, staring up at it. "Looks like that's the only way," Jinx said. "I'll get a ladder off the back wall," Zion offered. Jinx nodded as he pulled out the radio, but before he could turn it on, Birch called out, "Jinx, you better get over here." Jinx pocketed the radio, running over to the window. As he approached, he saw Birch motioning for him to get out of sight, which he did. "What's going on?" Jinx asked. "We got company," Birch replied. Jinx worked his way up to the window, seeing that there was movement on the rooftops across the street. "Jesus Christ. How in the hell did they get to downtown?" Jinx muttered. "I don't know, but they're here. What do you want to do?" Birch asked. Jinx thought about it for several moments, trying to come up with a plan. "You and Calvin are going to have to distract them so that Zion and I can get over to the gun store," Jinx decided. "I'm pretty sure we can get off a couple of shots before we get overwhelmed by those things." Birch motioned towards the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hardware store. Jinx smirked before patting his friend on the shoulder. "You 2 are going to have to head back to the sewers. Find some place to come up and get into a firing position." "Oh, is that all?" Birch said sarcastically. "You got to do it now, because if they figure out we're in here, they're just going to shoot out the windows. And that's all she wrote," Jinx explained. "I got my radio. I'll let you know when we're in position," Birch said, nodding as he started heading back to the bathroom, calling out as he went, "Calvin, we gotta move, man." "Where are we going?" Calvin asked. "No clue, but we gotta get moving towards it," Birch replied. As the 2 of them headed off, Zion was busy setting up the ladder, which reached all the way to the top of the building. "What's going on?" Zion asked. "We got company," Jinx replied. "Damn. Those assholes just don't quit, do they?" Zion remarked. "They do not," Jinx agreed. "So what's the play?" Zion inquired. "We sit tight until we hear from them," Jinx said. And if they decide to shoot out the windows? Zion asked. Jinx pointed to the skylight above them. If that happens, then we better hope that we're fast climbers. Chapter 14. Calvin and Birch climbed down a ladder back into the sewer, moving with a sense of purpose, knowing that the militia could strike at any moment. Where in the hell are we even going to go? Calvin asked. I'm just going to wing it and hope for the best, Birch replied. Okay, but that doesn't answer my question, Calvin said. Just follow me, Birch instructed. Birch raced back down the sewer, away from downtown before making a left-hand turn, taking them away from the side of the street that the others were at. He ran down a few blocks before spotting a manhole, stopping underneath it. Birch didn't hesitate, quickly climbing up the ladder, his assault rifle slung over his shoulder, but his handgun at the ready. He looked back down to Calvin, motioning for him to move. Take a couple steps back, because I might be retreating pretty quick, Birch said. Calvin nodded and did as requested. Birch steadied himself before pushing up on the manhole cover, getting it just high enough so that he could see out. He scanned the area, finding that they were in a small neighborhood. While there were some creatures in the area, only one was by the manhole, and there weren't all that many. Birch quietly lowered the manhole and climbed down a bit so that he could talk to Calvin in a lower tone. There's one up top, but I think we can move once I take it out, Birch said. We're what, 4, 5 blocks from downtown? Calvin asked. Something like that, Birch confirmed. Okay, you take that thing out and I'm following, Calvin said. Birch nodded as he holstered his handgun, drawing his knife before climbing back up. He pushed on the cover again, doing one more check to make sure that there was only a lone creature nearby. As soon as he was satisfied that was the case, he pushed open the manhole, quickly climbing out and getting to his feet. The noise that the metal cover made drew the attention of the ghoul. It barely got turned around before it was met with a blade to the head, cracking the skull and piercing into the brain. Birch lowered the ghoul to the ground, trying to limit the noise before yanking the blade from the head and keeping watch on the area around them as Calvin climbed up. Much to his relief, none of the other nearby creatures took notice of them. Calvin finally got up to the street, reaching down to pull the manhole cover shut, but Birch stopped him. Don't shut that. We might have to get through it again, Birch said. Well, we can't just leave it open. What if one of those things stumbles on it? Calvin argued. Birch thought for a moment before having an idea. He reached down, pulling it over and gently resting the cover over the hole so that about 10% was still open. It's not perfect, but it'll have to do. Come on, Birch said. Calvin nodded as the two of them walked as quietly as they could over to the grass before taking off running. As they got up a couple of blocks, they noticed that the zombies that should have been there weren't, confusing them. They stopped a couple of blocks away from downtown, where they finally saw zombies. Most of them were in the main street, pressed up against the windows of the buildings. However, the others they saw were focused on the alleyway behind the building on Main Street. All of the other creatures were facing that direction, drawn by something. However those guys got there must have drawn their attention, but how in the hell did they get there? Birch wondered. Birch went into thought, knowing that a regular vehicle wouldn't have been able to do it. That's when he saw it, the tracks, cutting through a yard on the next block. Birch motioned for Calvin to follow, and the two of them moved up quickly and quietly. However, as they approached the tracks in the yard, they noticed that they weren't just tracks, there were crushed zombies. Both men recoiled at the sight of mangled bodies, smushed underneath something with incredible weight. As they studied it further, they realized that they weren't crushed by tires. What in the hell made those tracks? I've never seen a truck make anything that looked like that, Calvin said. Birch let out a sigh, a creeping dread entering the back of his head. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Come on, we have to move, Birch urged. Birch looked around, spotting a 2-story house on the corner that was just across from the downtown area. While there were zombies nearby, all of them were focused on something in the alley. Before moving, Birch made sure to check the rooftops for men. He knew they were up there, but they were all focused on the gun store. Birch led them out from cover, running until they got to the road, then walking with soft steps to minimize the noise before running again. They got over to the backyards of the houses, stopping dead in their tracks when they saw a couple of zombies roaming around. Both men drew their knives, getting them ready. Birch whispered. "We have to take them out. Just let them drop, then get over to the house. If you get there first, do not go in without me," Birch instructed. Calvin nodded as Birch led them out from cover. They darted over to the closest zombies, jamming the knives into the back of their skulls and tossing them aside. Birch focused his attention on the last zombie, who was focused on Calvin as he ran by him. That made the job all the easier for Birch, who slipped up behind the ghoul and dispatched it with ease. Calvin got up to the back door of the house, looking in through the door, and not seeing any movement. He started to open the door but stopped when he heard Birch making a clicking sound to get his attention. Calvin looked back, and Birch was shaking his head, prompting Calvin to wait. A few moments later, Birch got there, not saying a word as he jammed his knife into the door latch. With a forceful smack, he got the door open. After a quick sweep to make sure they were alone in the house, they met at the stairs. "Come on, let's get upstairs. We need eyes on them," Birch said. The two of them rushed upstairs, getting over to the corner bedroom to look out, but making sure to stay out of sight. "Holy hell, what in God's name is that thing?" Calvin exclaimed. Birch let out a sigh, shaking his head. "That is the APC from hell," Birch replied. "APC?" Calvin questioned. "It's an armored personnel carrier, designed to withstand bullets, small explosives, and has tracks instead of wheels, which explained why there were so many crushed zombies in the yard. Although I can safely say that we never had anything like that over in the sandbox," Birch explained. The two men stared at the modified monstrosity sitting in the alleyway. The vehicle was imposing enough as it was, however the militia had taken the time to outfit it for zombie warfare. There were a few dozen sharpened pieces of rebar that had been welded to the outside of the vehicle, creating a multi-ton porcupine that would destroy any living thing that impacted it. And if it didn't destroy it, it would bring it along for the ride. Birch counted up half a dozen corpses that were impaled on the front spikes. A couple were lifeless, taking a piece of rebar to the face, while the others were still flailing around, fruitlessly trying to break free. "See if you can spot the shooters." "I gotta let Jinx know we're in position," Birch said. Calvin started looking through his scope as Birch pulled out the radio. "Jinx, do you copy?" Birch called. "What do you have for me, Birch?" Jinx responded. "We're in position. Calvin is figuring out the targets, but we did find out how they got to town so quickly," Birch informed. "Okay, I'll bite. How?" Jinx asked. "Modified APC, with rebar welded to the outside," Birch explained. "Yep, that'll do it," Jinx acknowledged. "How are you looking in the store?" Birch asked. "We got the skylight opened up. We can see out a little, but didn't want to chance it before we were ready to move. There's at least 5 of them over there, covering the whole block," Jinx reported. "Why in the hell didn't they just go for the store?" "It's clear they have the ability to," Birch questioned. "Maybe we spooked them. Or maybe that's not their strike team that's set up across the street. Whatever the reason, I don't think we have a lot of time," Jinx reasoned. "I tend to agree," Birch said. "So how long do you need before you're ready to go?" Jinx asked. "I'm not sure. There's a ton of those things on the street, and we don't have a shot on them at the moment," Birch admitted. "Okay, you got 10 minutes to figure something out. After that, we're going to make a run for it," Jinx stated. "If it's been 10 minutes and we don't have a shot on them, we'll just open fire and hope we distract them long enough to get over," Birch suggested. "Sounds like a plan to me," Jinx agreed. "Hey, have you heard from Parker or Dave?" "Because I could use an eye in the sky," Birch asked. "No, I haven't. I tried them a couple of minutes ago and it was just silent," Jinx answered. "That's less than encouraging," Birch noted. "Yeah, I know, but there's nothing we can do about it right now," Jinx said. "You're right," Birch agreed. Birch looked down at his watch, clicking a 10-minute timer and hitting start. "I just started my timer. In 10 minutes, we're going to be firing at something," Birch declared. "We'll be ready to move," Jinx confirmed. "Good luck," Jinx, Birch said. "You too, Birch," Jinx replied. The line went dead as Birch walked back over to Calvin, who was looking through his scope towards the rooftops. "Talk to me, Calvin. What are you seeing?" Birch asked. "A whole lot of nothing, man. I know they're up there, but they're just up at the front of the stores. I don't have a shot," Calvin reported. "Look around out there. Is there any place where you could get a shot?" Birch inquired. Calvin put his rifle down, looking around through the window, shaking his head. "Maybe if I could get up one of those trees across the way. But I'd need some heavy-duty climbing gear, and we just don't have the time for that," Calvin admitted. "So what do you want to do?" Birch asked. Calvin thought about it for a moment before speaking up. "I want you to get to the house across the street. When that timer goes off, I want you to pop off a few shots, then move down a block and fire off a few more," Calvin instructed. "What the hell are you going to do?" Birch asked. "I'm going to sit here and wait for one of those boys to get curious. When they do, I'm going to put a round into them," Calvin explained. "Okay, that's the play. But after you take one down, I want you moving," Birch emphasized. "Oh, trust me, man. I ain't staying around here any longer than absolutely necessary. I don't even like shooting at things that don't shoot back at me," Calvin replied. Birch chuckled as he patted Calvin on the back before retreating down the stairs. He then made his way across the street, getting into the backyard of a house, taking refuge in a tool shed for a moment. Once he realized he wasn't spotted, he retreated into the darkness, looking down at his watch and seeing that there were still 6 minutes to go. 6 more minutes. "And this place is going to be rocking," Birch muttered. Chapter 15. Birch continued standing in the darkness, his body tensing as the countdown on his watch moved towards 0. When it hit 15 seconds, he switched it off, grabbed his handgun, and got it ready while keeping the countdown in his mind. He grabbed the radio and spoke 3 words into it. "Here we go," he said. Birch stepped out from the shed, raised the handgun into the air, and squeezed off 3 quick shots. Right after doing so, he took off running, getting a full block down in a matter of moments. He stopped once again, firing 3 more shots into the air before running down a couple more houses and kicking the door in, his handgun at the ready as he quickly cleared the house. Meanwhile, Calvin sat by the window of the second-floor bedroom, aiming his rifle towards the rooftop's catty corner from him. "Come on, you know you want to know what those gunshots were all about. Come on now, be curious," he muttered. Calvin didn't move as the second batch of gunshots went off in the distance. After several moments, a couple of people popped up from the rooftop, their assault rifles raised as they ran to the back of the building. "Hello, boys," Calvin whispered. He took quick aim, seeing that the 2 militiamen were looking off into the distance, trying to get a read on where the shots were coming from. Calvin aimed at the one on the left, center mass. As he squeezed the trigger, the bullet ripped through the window and a moment later hit the gunman in the chest, sending him to the ground. Calvin quickly chambered another round and adjusted his aim to the other man, who was now aiming his rifle at him. "Shit," Calvin cursed. He pulled the trigger at the same time as the gunman did. Bullets ripped through the bedroom wall and window as Calvin dove to the ground. He lay there for a brief moment, patting himself down, relieved that he wasn't hit. He wasn't sure if his bullet hit the mark or not, but he didn't care. He stayed low as he scrambled back to his feet, more bullets peppering the front of the house as he quickly ran down the stairs and out the back door. Meanwhile, Jinx stood at the top of the ladder inside the hardware store, while Zion was right behind him. They could hear the initial gunshots going off in the distance. After the first trio, Zion started to move, but Jinx spoke up. "Not yet," Jinx said. Jinx waited until the second set of shots went off. As soon as they stopped, he pushed open the skylight. "Let's move." Jinx quickly got up to the roof, pulling out his assault rifle and taking aim towards the rooftops on the other side of the road. He spotted one man who was up on one knee, turning to look at what was happening behind him. Jinx quickly took aim, squeezing the trigger and sending a round in his direction, which struck him in the chest. Jinx didn't know if it was fatal or if he had a vest, but he knew at a minimum the man was on the ground in a lot of pain. Immediately, the other 2 men on the roof snapped back into the moment, aiming and firing towards Jinx, who returned fire. He and Zion bobbed and weaved while firing towards the others as they ran across the rooftop towards the gun store. They could feel the bullets whizzing by their heads as they rushed across, finally getting to the gun store rooftop. They found a heating unit on top of the building, which they took cover behind. The bullets continued to pepper the unit as Jinx popped in a fresh magazine. While he did that, Zion looked around, trying to find a way into the store. "Is that it over there?" Zion asked. Jinx looked and saw a small metal hatch on the corner, about 10 yards from where they were. "Yep," he confirmed. They both looked at it, seeing that it was 10 yards with no cover. Jinx got his rifle ready, smacking Zion on the shoulder. "You get it open and get down. I'm going to cover you," Jinx instructed. Zion nodded and got ready to move. "Go," Jinx commanded. Zion burst out from cover, running as hard as he could as Jinx popped up from behind the heating unit, opening fire across the street. Jinx continued to squeeze the trigger one right after the other, sending round after round towards the rooftop. His aim wasn't precise, with most of the bullets missing their target, but the constant firing was enough to pin the men down. Zion got over to the hatch, reaching down and quickly yanking it open. He barely looked through it before descending down the ladder into the darkened store below. As soon as Jinx's gun clicked empty, he dropped it and began sprinting as hard as he could towards the hatch. As he got close to it, more gunshots went off from across the street, narrowly missing him. Jinx knew he didn't have time to properly get into the hatch, so as he got close, he jumped up, yelling out as he did. His feet went through the opening, and he managed to grab onto the ladder after falling a few feet. The force of the grab strained his muscles due to the sudden stop. He looked down and saw Zion standing in a small room, holding a flashlight. He shined it on himself, waving the corporal down. As soon as Jinx got to the ground, Zion motioned for him to be quiet. Zion pulled out his knife, stepping out of the small maintenance room they were in. As soon as they were inside the main portion of the gun store, they heard moaning. Zion motioned for Jinx to cover the front row, and he worked his way down along the back of the store. As he approached the counter, he saw a ghoul shambling out from the back office. The ghoul got excited as it spotted Zion, pressing up against the front checkout counter. Zion just shook his head as he stabbed it in the head, dropping it onto the counter, the body slowly slumping to the floor. "We're clear. But we gotta get these shutters closed," Jinx called out. Zion ran to the front of the building, where Jinx was already reaching up and pulling the metal shutters down over the glass. As they did, the men across the street opened fire, peppering the glass with bullets. While the glass began to spiderweb, it didn't falter. However, a couple of bullets managed to get through the glass cleanly, hitting the shelves. Finally, they got them shut, sealing themselves inside. "Get that door we came through shut and secure," Jinx ordered. "I'm on it," Zion replied. Jinx rushed over to the counter, hopping over it and scanning the wall. "Oh, there's a beauty," Jinx murmured. He pulled down a high-end assault rifle with a mid-range tactical scope on it. He quickly checked it out before grabbing several boxes of ammunition and magazines off the shelf. It took him a moment to get a magazine loaded up and slapped into the weapon, but once he did, he stopped, breathing a sigh of relief as Zion came back over. "Did you find something you like?" Zion asked. "This should be fun to play with," Jinx replied. "So what now?" Zion inquired. "See what kind of bags you can find. We need them to be heavy-duty that can hold a couple thousand rounds. And they have to have handles or straps or something," Jinx directed. "I'll start looking," Zion said. As Zion did that, Jinx went back to loading up a few more magazines with ammunition. As he did, the radio clicked on, with a mysterious voice on it. "Hello, Corporal. If you're still alive and not otherwise occupied, I was wondering if you had a moment to chat," the voice said. Jinx's blood ran cold as he heard the voice, which was not only unfamiliar to him but had a menacing undertone to it. Before he responded, Zion came back over, hearing it. "Who the hell is that?" Zion asked. "We're about to find out," Jinx replied. He took a deep breath before hitting the button on the radio. "This is Corporal Jinx. To whom do I have the pleasure?" he asked. "Ah, there you are, Corporal. Good to see that you're still alive and kicking. Perhaps if my men hadn't underestimated you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But here we are. My name is Lucas, and I'm in charge of this operation," the voice answered. "Is that a fact? You're in charge, huh? I gotta say, you should probably spend a little more time getting your men trained up for the field before bringing them out, Jinx retorted. Unfortunately, Corporal, not everyone can be like us and have real-world combat experience before this unfortunate situation was thrust upon the world, Lucas replied. Combat experience, huh? Did you serve? Or were you a mercenary just doing it for a paycheck? Jinx questioned. There was a bit of a laugh coming over the line. I spent the last 3 years living in a double wide that was built before I was born, so I can assure you I wasn't fighting for money, Lucas replied. Fair enough. And no offense intended there. I had to ask, and quite frankly, after the day I've had thanks to your men, sometimes the sass just comes out on its own, Jinx said. No need to apologize, Corporal, Lucas responded. Please call me Jinx, Jinx insisted. All right, Jinx, no need to apologize. If people had been shooting at me all day, I probably wouldn't be as calm as I am either, Lucas said. So how long were you in? Jinx asked. Just shy of a decade. I was planning on going career until an IED over in the sandbox had other ideas, Lucas replied. Those things are some nasty business. Lost a few friends that way, Jinx said. My condolences, Lucas offered. Appreciated. And speaking of losing friends, I'm going to assume that based on the channel you're calling me from, you're with a few of mine, Jinx guessed. As a matter of fact, I am. And to answer your next question, yes, they're fine. Well, mostly fine. The young private got a nasty puncture wound on his hand from trying to fight off one of my men. He has been patched up, and he'll live, but his juggling days are likely over, Lucas informed. And let me guess, they'll be all right, as long as I do as you say, Jinx surmised. That's the meat and potatoes of it. Look, Jinx, I'm going to be straight with you. I have no desire to harm these men. And even though several of my men have fallen in battle to you, I have no desire to harm you either. But I have orders to bring in what's inside that gun store. Just like I'm pretty sure you have similar orders, Lucas stated. It was more of a begging and pleading situation on their part. But yeah, that sounds about right, Jinx said. Interesting, Lucas remarked. Lucas trailed off for a few moments before continuing. So Jinx, how do we resolve this? Lucas asked. I don't suppose you could let us just walk out of here with the bullets and say the store was empty when you got here? Jinx suggested. Lucas let out a laugh. No, I'm afraid not, Lucas said. I tell you what, I need a little while to think about it. We didn't exactly have the easiest time getting here, and since I make up 90% of what I do while I'm doing it, it'll be nice to have some time to figure out how to get out of here without getting killed, Jinx said. I tell you what, I haven't had a chance to eat today, and I like the idea of a nice meal on the river, so I'll give you an hour to figure it out, Lucas offered. I can work with that. I appreciate it, Jinx replied. Don't mention it, Jinx. Oh, and one more thing. I don't know if you have the ability to see into the sky, but if you do, you'll find that our mutual friend Dave is going to be hovering his drone right over top of you. So if you're thinking about sneaking out onto the roof and taking shots at my men, or making a run for it out the back door, just know that I'll see it, Lucas warned. Understood, Lucas. Now you go enjoy your meal. I have some thinking to get to, Jinx said. Enjoy your hour, Lucas said. The line went dead as Zion looked over to Jinx. So what's the plan? Zion asked. I have no idea. The end.